They took her baby to pay a dead man's debt. In the town of Whitlock, justice wore a price tag, and mercy was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. Mara Ellsworth stood in the blazing sun, watching her 5-month-old daughter placed on an auction block like livestock. Her screams meant nothing. Her tears changed nothing. The gavel was about to fall into the hands of the cruelest man in the territory, until the sound of hooves shattered the silence. A mountain man, more legend than flesh, rode into town at high noon, and he carried enough gold to rewrite her fate. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The sun beat down on Whitlock like a hammer on an anvil, merciless and unrelenting. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned the dirt streets into rivers of dust. Mara Ellsworth stood at the base of the courthouse steps, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Around her, the crowd pressed close. Farmers, miners, merchants, curiosity seekers, all drawn by the promise of spectacle. But this wasn't entertainment. This was her life being torn apart in broad daylight. "Lot number 17, announced Sheriff Drummond, his voice booming across the square. He was a thick-necked man with a handlebar mustache and eyes that had long ago stopped seeing people as anything more than problems to be managed. One female infant, approximately 5 months of age. Healthy, no defects. Opening bid is $20. Mara's knees buckled. She would have fallen if not for the rough hand of Deputy Hayes gripping her elbow, holding her upright like a prisoner at sentencing. "This is insane," Mara's voice cracked as she lunged forward. "She's not property. She's my daughter." The sheriff didn't even glance her way. The deceased owed substantial debts to multiple creditors. Under territorial law, all assets of the estate, including dependents, may be seized to satisfy outstanding obligations. "My husband's debts died with him," Mara screamed, her voice raw. "James is dead. He's been dead for 3 months. You can't—" "Can't I?" Sheriff Drummond finally looked at her, his expression carved from stone. "Mrs. Ellsworth, your husband borrowed money from half the businesses in this town. He borrowed from the bank, the mill, the company store. He even borrowed from private citizens. That money doesn't just disappear because he had the poor judgment to get himself killed in a mine collapse." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed pity. Most showed nothing at all. In Whitlock, debt was sin, and poverty was contagious. On the courthouse steps, elevated above the crowd like an offering to cruel gods, sat a wooden cradle. Inside it, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket, was Hope, Mara's daughter, her only reason for drawing breath since James died. The baby's dark curls were damp with sweat, her tiny fists waving in the air, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding around her. $20, came a voice from the crowd, a leathery prospector with more beard than face. Mara's heart lurched. "No, please, God, no." $25, countered a woman in a severe black dress, a boarding house owner known for working orphans like pack animals. The sheriff raised his gavel. "25, do I hear 30? $50. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Silas Thorne stepped forward, and the temperature seemed to drop despite the blistering heat. He was a tall man, whip-thin, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed obscene in the dusty square. His silver-topped cane clicked against the wooden steps as he ascended toward the cradle. Everything about him spoke of money and power. The gold watch chain across his vest, the rings on his fingers, the way people instinctively stepped back when he passed. Silas owned the largest silver mine in the territory. He also owned the bank, the general store, and half the land in the county. Some said he owned the sheriff too, though Drummond would never admit it. $50, Silas repeated, his voice smooth as snake oil. "And I'll settle the remainder of the late Mr. Ellsworth's debts, all of them. Consider it an act of Christian charity." Mara felt bile rise in her throat. Everyone knew what kind of charity Silas Thorne practiced. His mines were graveyards. His workers were slaves in all but name. And the women who disappeared into his mansion on the hill were never quite the same when they emerged, if they emerged at all. "You can't give him my baby!" Mara broke free from the deputy's grip and threw herself at the steps. "I'll work. I'll pay back every penny. I swear to God I'll—" Silas looked down at her the way a man might regard a beetle on his boot. "My dear Mrs. Ellsworth, you couldn't pay back these debts in 3 lifetimes. Your husband was a fool with money, and it seems with women. He left you with nothing but bills and this infant. The way he said infant made Mara's skin crawl. However, Silas continued, his thin lips curling into something approximating a smile, I am not without compassion. The child will be well cared for in my household. She'll be fed, clothed, educated, far better than you could provide living in that hovel you call a home. That hovel is all I have left, Mara's voice broke. And she's my daughter, mine. You can take the house, take everything else, but not her. Please, not her. Sheriff Drummond raised his gavel. Mr. Thorne's bid stands at $50 plus settlement of remaining debts, totaling approximately $300. Going once? I'll double whatever you earn, Mara sobbed. I'll work the mines myself. Going twice. Someone help me, please. Mara's gaze swept the crowd, searching desperately for a friendly face, for anyone with the courage to stand against Silas Thorne. But she found only averted eyes and uncomfortable shuffling. These people had their own problems, their own debts, their own fears. The gavel began its descent. Then a sound cut through the square like a thunderclap. Crack! The report of a rifle shot froze everyone in place. The bullet hadn't hit anyone. It had struck the wooden post beside the sheriff's head, close enough that splinters rained down on his hat. Sheriff Drummond's face went white. What in the hell? The crowd scattered like startled birds, people diving for cover behind wagons and water troughs. In the sudden clearing of bodies, Mar could see to the far end of the square, where the road from the mountain pass opened into town. A lone rider sat motionless on a massive gray stallion. Even from a distance, the figure was imposing. The man was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the horse's width. He was dressed in furs and leather, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A rifle rested across his saddle, still smoking from the warning shot. The whispers started immediately. Mountain man. Ain't seen one in town for years. Look at the size of him. That's not a man, that's a grizzly bear in a coat. The rider urged his horse forward. The hoofbeats echoed in the stunned silence, slow and deliberate. As he drew closer, Mara could make out more details. His face was heavily bearded, weathered, and scarred, with eyes the color of winter ice. He looked like something carved from the mountain itself, ancient, immovable, dangerous. But it was his eyes that stopped Mara's heart. She knew those eyes. The memory hit her like a physical blow. 10 years ago. A blizzard that had buried the mountain pass in 8 feet of snow. She'd been 17, newly arrived in Whitlock with her father, when she'd found the dying man half frozen in a snowdrift at the edge of town. Against her father's warnings, she dragged him inside, thawed his frozen limbs by the fire, fed him broth, and sat vigil for 3 days while fever tried to claim him. When he'd finally woken, those ice-blue eyes had locked onto hers with an intensity that had terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. He'd stayed only long enough to regain his strength, spoke perhaps 20 words total, and then disappeared back into the mountains before dawn one morning, leaving nothing behind but a hand-carved wooden bird on her windowsill. She'd never expected to see him again. But here he was, a decade later, arriving like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice. The mountain man halted his horse 20 feet from the courthouse steps. He dismounted with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud that Mara felt through the soles of her worn shoes. Sheriff Drummond found his voice first. You just discharged a firearm within town limits and nearly killed a lawman. I could hang you for that. The mountain man's gaze didn't waver. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Wasn't aiming to kill. If I was, you'd be dead. A chill ran through the crowd. There was no bravado in the statement, no threat, just simple fact. Silas Thorne stepped forward, his cane clicking. This doesn't concern you, stranger. This is a legal proceeding, sanctioned by territorial law. Whatever grievance you imagine you have, no grievance. The mountain man reached into his coat. Half the crowd flinched and pulled out a leather pouch. It landed on the courthouse steps with a heavy metallic sound that made everyone's eyes widen. How much? Sheriff Drummond blinked. Excuse me? The child. How much? Mara's breath caught. Hope. He was asking about Hope. The sheriff exchanged glances with Silas, clearly thrown off script. The current bid is $50 plus debt settlement. $300 total. The mountain man's jaw tightened. Opened the pouch. Deputy Hayes, hands shaking, picked up the leather bag and loosened the drawstring. Gold coins spilled onto the steps, glinting in the savage sunlight. The crowd gasped collectively. "There's at least $500 here," Hayes breathed. $600, the mountain man corrected. "Twice your asking price. For the child in clearance of all debts." Silas's face flushed purple. "This is preposterous. Sheriff, you can't seriously consider $600 in gold," Drummond said slowly, his eyes locked on the fortune scattered across the steps. In Whitlock, in the whole territory, that kind of money didn't appear often, and everyone knew the sheriff took a percentage of seized assets. That's more than fair compensation. "I had a verbal contract," Silas sputtered, "and now someone's made a better offer," the sheriff said, already doing the math in his head. "That's how auctions work, Mr. Thorne." Silas's eyes narrowed to slits. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, mountain man? I own this town. One word from me and then say it." The mountain man took a step forward. He didn't draw a weapon, didn't raise his voice. But something in his posture made Silas take an involuntary step backward. "Say whatever words you want. Won't change the fact that I'm walking out of here with that child." The moment stretched like a drawn bowstring. Then Silas smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Mara's stomach turn. "Very well. Take the bastard orphan. But this isn't over, stranger. Not by a long shot." He turned and descended the steps, his cane clicking with each measured step. The crowd parted for him, and he disappeared into his waiting carriage without a backward glance. Sheriff Drummond cleared his throat. "Well then, by the power vested in me by the territorial government, I declare this debt satisfied and all claims against the Ellsworth estate resolved." He banged his gavel once. "The infant is hereby released into the custody of—" He paused. "What's your name, stranger?" "Rourke. Calder Rourke." Mara felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't remember when she'd started crying again. Calder Rourke. Even his name sounded like the mountains. Hard, enduring, ancient. The sheriff nodded. "Mr. Rourke, you have legal custody. The gold will be distributed to satisfy the creditors. Deputy Hayes, return the child to—" He trailed off, suddenly unsure. The baby couldn't go with the mountain man. That would be absurd. But legally, Calder now owned the claim to the child. Calder solved the problem by turning to Mara for the first time. Those ice-blue eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "The mother comes too," he said simply. Drummond frowned. "Now, hold on. That wasn't part of the mother comes too." Each word fell like an axe blow. "Or you can keep your courthouse steps and your crooked auction, and I'll take the gold back." Mara found herself nodding frantically. Yes, I'll go. Anywhere. I'll go. Just let me have my daughter." The sheriff looked between them, clearly calculating whether this was worth the trouble. Finally, he waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. Take them both. Just get out of my town before Silas changes his mind." Calder climbed the steps in 3 long strides. He stopped before the cradle, and for a moment, Mara saw something crack in his stony expression. His massive hands, scarred and calloused, hands that had killed and built and survived, reached down with surprising gentleness and lifted Hope from her cradle. The baby, who had been fussing, immediately quieted in his arms. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, and one tiny hand reached up to grasp his beard. Something like pain crossed Calder's face. Then he turned and descended the steps, carrying Hope as if she were made of spun glass. He stopped beside Mara, who stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Can you ride?" His voice was gentler now, though still rough. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then get on the horse. We're leaving. Now." She didn't argue, didn't ask questions. She simply climbed onto the massive gray stallion, and Calder handed Hope up to her before mounting behind them. His arms came around both of them, holding the reins, and Mara felt the solid warmth of him at her back. a wall between her and the town that had tried to destroy her. "Wait!" a voice called out. Margaret Chen, the Chinese laundress who'd been kind to Mara after James died, pushed through the crowd with a bundle of cloth. "For the baby, and for you, you'll need supplies." Calder took the bundle with a nod of thanks, then kicked the horse into motion. As they rode out of Whitlock's town square, Mara looked back once. She saw the faces of the people who'd watched her baby being sold. Some looked relieved. Some looked ashamed. Most looked away. She also saw Silas Thorne standing beside his black carriage, watching their departure with eyes like chips of flint. The look on his face promised this was far from over. They rode in silence for hours, climbing higher into the mountains as the sun tracked across the sky. Mara held Hope close, feeling the baby's heartbeat against her chest, still half convinced this was a dream from which she'd wake to find herself back in the nightmare of the auction block. But the rhythmic movement of the horse was real. The mountain air growing cooler was real. The solid presence of Calder Rourke behind her was real. Finally, as they crossed a narrow ridge that looked out over an impossible vista of peaks and valleys, Calder spoke. "You saved my life once." Mara twisted to look at him. "You remember?" "I remember." His eyes were fixed on the trail ahead. 10 years ago, snowstorm, I was dying. You pulled me from the drift, brought me inside. Your father wanted to throw me back out. You wouldn't let him." "He was afraid," Mara said quietly. "Mountain men have a reputation. We earn it." A ghost of something, maybe humor, maybe regret, flickered across his face. "Most of us, anyway." "Why?" Mara asked. The question encompassed everything. Why come back? Why now? Why $600 in gold? Why risk Silas Thorne's wrath for a woman and child he didn't know? Calder was silent for so long that Mara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, he said, "Because I had a daughter once, and I wasn't there when she needed me." The words fell into the space between them like stones into a well, and Mara heard all the grief and guilt that lurked in their depths. She wanted to ask more. What happened? Where was his daughter now? How did he lose her? But something in the rigid set of his shoulders told her this was all he could give. For now. So instead, she adjusted Hope in her arms and said, "Thank you for saving us." Calder didn't respond. But as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge like scattered diamonds, Mara felt his arms tighten slightly around her, sheltering her and Hope from the mountain wind that had begun to rise. And for the first time in 3 months, since James died and left her drowning in debt and despair, Mara Ellsworth felt something she'd thought was lost forever. She felt safe. Eat. They made camp that night in a protected hollow where massive pines formed a natural windbreak. Calder built a fire with practiced efficiency, and Mara watched in amazement as he produced supplies from his saddlebags, dried meat, bannock bread, even a small tin of canned peaches that must have cost a fortune in Whitlock. "For the baby," he said gruffly, handing her a small bowl of mashed peaches mixed with water. "She old enough for solid food?" "Just barely," Mara said, feeling a rush of gratitude. "But yes, thank you." She fed Hope slowly, marveling at how the baby took to the sweet fruit. Calder sat across the fire, his face half-shadowed, working on something in his hands. It took Mara a moment to realize he was carving, a small piece of wood, his knife moving with sure, steady strokes. "You made this," she said suddenly, remembering. She reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a small wooden bird, wings spread in flight. "She won. You left it for me 10 years ago." Calder looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You kept it." "Of course I kept it." Mara touched the carving gently. "It was the only thing I owned that wasn't practical. The only thing that was just beautiful." Something shifted in Calder's expression, softening. "Your father, he's still in Whitlock?" Mara shook her head. "He died 6 years ago. Pneumonia. I married James 2 years after that." She paused. "He wasn't a bad man, just weak. He wanted to strike it rich in the mines, borrowed money to buy equipment, then borrowed more when the first claim didn't pan out. By the time he died in that collapse, we were drowning in debt. And they came for your daughter. Territorial law is unforgiving, to women especially. Mara looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny fist curled against her cheek. They said I couldn't inherit the debts, but also couldn't inherit anything to pay them with. So they took everything, the house, the furniture, James's tools. And then they said Hope was an asset of the estate. Like she was a piece of furniture they could sell. Should have burned that courthouse to the ground, Calder said flatly. Mara looked up, startled, and saw he wasn't joking. But there was a weariness in his voice that suggested he'd seen too many injustices like this one, and burning down courthouses never solved the fundamental problem. Where are we going? Mara asked. My cabin. 2 more days' ride into the high country, remote enough that Silas Thorne's reach doesn't extend that far. He'll come after us, won't he? Silas doesn't forgive insults. Probably. Calder's knife continued its steady work. But the mountains are my territory, not his, and I've survived worse than a rich man's hired guns. The certainty in his voice should have been arrogant, but instead it was simply factual. This was a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and it was considerable. Why did you do it? Mara asked again, needing to understand. $600 is a fortune. You could have walked away. Calder's hand stilled. He stared into the fire for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was barely above a whisper. Like I said, I had a daughter once. Had? Mara's heart clenched. Is she? Don't know. The words came out sharp, painful. She was taken from me when she was 2 years old. 8 years ago now. Could be dead. Could be alive somewhere calling another man father. Taken? By who? Calder's jaw clenched. That's a long story. Not one for tonight. Mara recognized the walls going up, the doors closing. She'd pushed enough, but she couldn't help asking one more question. What was her name? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it over the crackling fire. Nira. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with loss. When I saw you on those steps, Calder continued, his voice rough, screaming for your daughter while they tried to take her, I saw my wife. 8 years ago, screaming while soldiers dragged Nira away, and I was pinned down by 3 men, bleeding from a gut wound, couldn't move, couldn't help, couldn't do a goddamn thing but watch them take my daughter and kill the woman I loved. Mara's breath caught. Calder, I swore that day that I'd never be that helpless again, that if I ever saw another woman fighting for her child, I'd be the man who showed up, the man I should have been for my own family. Tears blurred Mara's vision. You didn't fail them. You were wounded. Doesn't matter. Calder's voice was flat, final. I failed. And I've spent 8 years living with that failure, searching for Nira when I can, surviving when I have to, waiting for a chance to make it right. Is that what today was? Making it right? Maybe. He looked across the fire at her, and in his eyes she saw a depth of pain that made her own losses seem small. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching people get crushed by bastards like Silas Thorne and not doing anything about it. Mara wanted to say something profound, something that would ease the burden she could see crushing him, but what could she say that wouldn't sound empty? Instead, she simply said, Thank you for being the man who showed up. Calder nodded once, then returned to his carving. The knife whispered against wood, and the fire crackled, and Hope slept peacefully in Mara's arms. And for that moment, in a temporary camp on a mountainside, 3 broken people found a fragile peace. Mara woke to the sound of movement. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Across the dead fire, Calder was already packing up camp with quiet efficiency. Hope stirred in her arms, making small, hungry sounds, and Mara realized with a pang of anxiety that she had no supplies for the baby beyond what Margaret had provided. No extra clothes, no blankets, no... Here! Calder appeared beside her with a canteen of water and more of the mashed peaches. Feed her. We'll reach a trading post by midday. Can get proper supplies there. Mara took the offered food gratefully. You've done this before. Cared for a baby, I mean. Something flickered across his face. Nira wasn't always two. Had to learn, same as any father. Your wife, what was her name? Anahita. The name came out like a prayer. She was Shoshone. Most beautiful woman I ever saw, not just her face, but her spirit. Fierce and gentle at the same time. She could track a deer through stone country, deliver a breech foal, sing songs that would make grown men weep. And she loved that little girl more than life itself. How did you meet? Calder sat back, his eyes distant with memory. I was running from something stupid. Bar fight gone bad, man died who didn't deserve to. Came into the mountains to disappear, found Anahita's tribe instead, or rather, she found me, half dead from exposure again. Seemed to be my specialty back then. A ghost of a smile. She nursed me back to health. I stayed for a week, then a month, then a season. By the time the snow melted, I knew I couldn't leave. So you joined her people? Tried to. Some accepted me, some never did. Can't blame them. White men hadn't exactly earned the Shoshone's trust. But Anahita's father was the chief, and he saw something in me worth saving. Taught me their ways, their language. Let me marry his daughter. His voice dropped. Best 3 years of my life. What happened? Mara asked gently. Calder's expression hardened. The cavalry patrol came through, looking for hostiles. Some young fool had stirred up trouble at a fort 200 miles away, and now every native camp was suspect. They demanded we relocate to a reservation. Chief refused. This was our land. We had a treaty. The lieutenant didn't care about treaties. He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching. They opened fire. I tried to protect Anahita and Nira, but there were too many of them. I took 3 bullets, went down hard. Last thing I saw before I blacked out was soldiers dragging Nira away while Anahita fought them like a wildcat. His voice cracked. They shot her. Right there. In front of our daughter. She died trying to protect Nira. Oh God, Mara breathed. When I came to, 2 days later, I was in a ravine where someone had dragged me. Probably thought I was dead. The camp was burned. Most of the tribe scattered or killed, and Nira, he shook his head. Gone. I spent 2 years searching every fort, every orphanage, every adoption record I could find. Nothing. It's like she vanished into smoke. But you haven't stopped looking. Can't stop. Won't stop. His eyes met hers, and she saw the iron determination that had kept him alive through unimaginable loss. She's out there somewhere. I know it. And one day, I'll find her. Mara's heart ached for him. Calder, 8 years is a long time. She would have been so young when she was taken. She might not even remember. I know. His voice was harsh. I know she probably doesn't remember me. Doesn't remember her mother. Probably thinks she's white, has some fake name, some fake family story. But she's my daughter. And even if she never knows it, I need to find her. Need to know she's alive, she's safe, she's... He couldn't finish. Mara reached across the space between them and touched his hand. We'll find her. I promise. However I can help, I will. Calder looked at her hand on his, and for a moment she thought he'd pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over and squeezed gently, just once, before letting go. Better get moving, he said, his voice gruff again. Long ride ahead. Net. The trading post appeared at midday, exactly as Calder had predicted. It was a rough collection of buildings huddled at the junction of 2 mountain trails. A store, a stable, a small inn that looked like a strong wind might knock it over. The proprietor, a grizzled old trapper named Dutch, greeted Calder like an old friend. Rourke, ain't seen you in half a year. Thought maybe a bear finally got you. Not yet. Calder dismounted and helped Mara down. Need supplies, baby things, women's clothes, food for a week. Dutch's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Mara and Hope. Got yourself a family now? Didn't peg you for the settling down type. It's complicated, Calder said flatly. Ain't it always? Dutch grinned, showing the gaps in his teeth. Come on in, little lady. Got some things that might fit you. And I think my wife kept some of our grandbaby's old clothes around here somewhere. An hour later, Mara emerged from the trading post wearing proper trail clothes, tough canvas pants, a wool shirt, sturdy boots, and carrying a pack full of supplies for Hope. Dutch's wife, a round native woman named Tsura, had been overjoyed to finally have an excuse to pass along her grandchild's outgrown things. "That man of yours is a good one," Tsura had said, while helping Mara sort through baby clothes. "Haunted, but good. You hold on to him." "He's not we're not," Mara had stammered. Tsura had just smiled knowingly. "Not yet, but you will be. A woman knows these things." Now, watching Calder secure their supplies to his horse, while Dutch regaled him with the latest mountain gossip, Mara felt a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't attraction exactly. Her heart was still too raw from James's death, her fear still too fresh from yesterday's horror. But it was something. Connection, maybe. The recognition of one damaged soul by another. "Heard some news you might want to know," Dutch was saying, his voice lowering. "Silas Thorne sent men out this morning, asking about a big mountain man and a woman with a baby, offering $100 for information." Calder's expression darkened. "How many men?" 4, 5 maybe. Hired guns, from the look of them. Real professionals, not Silas's usual thugs. "They know which way we headed?" "Not yet, but someone'll talk eventually. $100 is a fortune to most folks around here." Calder nodded grimly. "Thanks for the warning. You need help, you come back here. Me and Tsura, we'll stand with you." "Appreciate it," Calder clasped Dutch's shoulder. "But I'd rather not bring trouble to your door if I can help it." They rode out within the hour, climbing higher into terrain that grew progressively more rugged. The trail narrowed to barely more than a deer path, winding between massive pines and across streams running fast with snowmelt. "How much farther?" Mara asked as the afternoon sun began its descent. "Should reach the cabin by nightfall, if we keep this pace." But Hope, as if sensing the tension in the air, began to fuss, then to cry. Then to wail with the impressive lung capacity of a distressed 5-month-old. Mara tried everything, singing, rocking, offering food. Nothing worked. The baby's cries echoed through the mountains, and every time Mara felt Calder tense behind her, she knew what he was thinking. The sound would carry for miles. "I'm sorry," Mara said desperately. "She's probably scared. Everything's so different. I don't know what—" "Stop." Calder reined the horse to a halt. "Let me try." Mara turned in surprise as Calder dismounted and reached up for the baby. She handed Hope over hesitantly, watching as this massive, scarred mountain man cradled her daughter against his chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that size. And then he began to sing. The song was in another language, Shoshone, Mara realized. Calder's deep, rough voice shaped the unfamiliar syllables into a melody that was at once haunting and beautiful. It spoke of mountains and rivers, of the wind through the pines, of a mother's love that transcended death. It was a lullaby. For his daughter, once upon a time. Hope's cries gradually subsided. Her tiny fist curled into Calder's fur vest, and her eyes began to droop. Within minutes, she was asleep again, peaceful in his arms. Calder stood very still, looking down at the baby with an expression of such naked grief that Mara felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nira loved this song," he said softly. "Anahita would sing it every night. After she died, I couldn't bear to. This is the first time I've sung it in 8 years. Mara slid down from the horse and stood beside him, not touching, just present. "Thank you," she whispered. Calder nodded, his jaw tight. Carefully, he handed Hope back to Mara and remounted the horse in one smooth motion. But as they rode on through the gathering dusk, Mara heard him humming quietly. That same lullaby, a bridge across 8 years of grief, connecting the past to this fragile present. The cabin appeared as the last light was dying from the sky, a solid structure of logs and stone built into the mountainside itself. It was larger than Mara expected, with a covered porch and a stone chimney from which thin wisps of smoke already rose. Calder must have banked the fire when he left days ago, keeping the embers alive. Inside it was Spartan, but well built. One large main room with a massive stone fireplace, a sleeping loft accessible by ladder, shelves lined with books and supplies, furs and blankets stacked neatly in corners. Everything spoke of a man who'd built a fortress against the world, a sanctuary where he could exist without the complications of civilization. But there were also touches of softness, wildflowers dried and hanging from the rafters, carved wooden animals lining a shelf, a star quilt folded carefully on the single chair. Evidence of a woman's touch, preserved like museum pieces. Anahita made that quilt, Calder said, following Mara's gaze. Took her a whole winter, said it was for our home when we finally had one. It's beautiful. She was beautiful. He moved to the fireplace and began building up the banked coals into a proper fire. You and the baby can take the loft. I'll sleep down here. Calder, this is your home. We're the intruders. Your guests. His tone left no room for argument. And you've been through hell. Take the comfortable bed. I've slept in worse places. Too exhausted to argue, Mara climbed the ladder to the loft. It was cozy up there, with a real feather mattress and more blankets than one person could possibly need. She laid Hope down carefully, building a barrier of rolled blankets to keep her from rolling off the edge, then collapsed beside her daughter. Below, she heard Calder moving around. The clank of pots, the scrape of a chair, the sound of water being poured. Normal, domestic sounds that seemed surreal after the chaos of the past 2 days. Mara closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment before going down to help with dinner. But exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide, and she knew nothing more until morning. She woke to sunlight streaming through the loft's small window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in her old home, that James was downstairs making breakfast, that the last 3 months had been nothing but a nightmare. Then she looked over and saw Hope sleeping peacefully in a nest of blankets, and reality crashed back. But with it, surprisingly, came something else. Hope. They were safe. They were free of Whitlock and Silas Thorne's reach, and they were under the protection of a man who'd proven himself willing to fight for them. Mara climbed down the ladder to find Calder at the stove, cooking with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. He'd changed out of his trail clothes into clean canvas pants and a wool shirt, and with his hair tied back and his face washed clean of trail dust, he looked less like a mountain myth and more like a man. A scarred, grieving, impossibly strong man, but a man nonetheless. "Morning," she said softly. He glanced back. "You needed the sleep. Hungry?" "Starving." He served breakfast without ceremony. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. They ate in companionable silence, the morning sun painting the cabin's interior in shades of gold. It was Mara who finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" Calder set down his coffee cup. "You stay here, both of you, for as long as you need. I'll ride into town occasionally for supplies, keep an ear out for news about Silas, but mostly you lay low, let people forget about you. And then? And then you decide what you want to do. Stay here, start over somewhere else, I don't care. But you're not going back to Whitlock, and you're not letting men like Silas Thorne dictate your life anymore." There was a fierce protectiveness in his voice that made Mara's throat tight. "I meant what I said," she told him, "about helping you find Nira. I'm good with records, with research, and I know what it's like to be desperate for information. Let me help." Calder studied her for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to a shelf, pulling down a worn leather journal. He set it on the table between them and flipped it open. Pages and pages of notes, names, dates, places, sketches of a little girl's face drawn from memory, showing how she might look at different ages, maps with locations marked and crossed out. A methodical, heartbreaking record of 8 years of searching. "I've been to every orphanage within 300 miles, Calder said. Every church that places children. Every fort that might have records. Nothing. It's like she vanished." Mara studied the sketches. The little girl had Calder's strong features, but softer, more delicate, dark eyes that held hints of mischief, a smile that could light up the world, and behind her left ear, in every sketch, a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark. "This birthmark," Mara said. "Is it accurate?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because that's something they couldn't hide or change. Hair can be cut, names can be changed, memories can fade. But a birthmark," Mara felt excitement building. "That's permanent, that's provable. That's how we'll find her." For the first time since she'd met him, Mara saw something like hope flicker in Calder Rourke's ice-blue eyes. And in that moment, she realized that this wasn't just about repaying a debt. This wasn't just about gratitude for being rescued. This was about two broken people finding a reason to fight, together. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of challenges to come. Silas Thorne wouldn't forget. His hired guns were likely already closing in. And somewhere out there, a little girl who didn't know she was near O'Rourke was living a lie. But for now, in a cabin carved from the mountainside, 3 survivors had found each other. And sometimes, that was enough to start rebuilding from the ruins. Hope stirred in the loft above, making the small sounds that meant she'd be awake and hungry soon. Mara moved to climb the ladder, but Calder's voice stopped her. "Mara." She turned. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me, for coming here, for—" He struggled with the words. "For reminding me what it feels like to protect someone, to have someone to protect." "Thank you for showing up," Mara replied, "for being the man who rode into town at noon when everyone else just watched." Their eyes met across the cabin. 2 people who'd lost everything, learning that sometimes, you could find something worth fighting for in the ruins. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the mountain. And inside, against all odds, something fragile and precious began to take root. A beginning. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Mara learned the routines of mountain life, how to fetch water from the spring behind the cabin without disturbing the deer that drank there at dawn, how to bank the fire so it would last through the night, how to read the sky for coming weather. Calder taught her without condescension, showing her once and then stepping back to let her figure it out herself. Hope thrived in the mountain air. Her cheeks grew rosy, her laugh came more easily, and she developed a particular fondness for grabbing fistfuls of Calder's beard whenever he held her. He pretended to be annoyed, but Mara caught him smiling when he thought she wasn't looking. At night, after Hope was asleep in the loft, Mara and Calder would sit by the fire and go through his journal. She'd begun organizing his notes, creating a system where there had been only desperate searching. She cross-referenced dates, drew connections he'd missed in his grief-fueled urgency, eliminated dead ends and highlighted patterns. "You're good at this," Calder said one evening, watching her sketch out a timeline on a piece of birch bark. "Seeing things I couldn't see." "You were too close to it," Mara replied, not looking up. "When you're drowning, you can't see the shoreline. You just see water." "And you're not drowning anymore?" She paused, considering. "I'm still in the water, but at least now I can see which way to swim." It was during the second week that everything changed. Calder had ridden down to Dutch's trading post for supplies, leaving Mara alone with Hope for the first time. She'd been nervous about it, but Calder had assured her she'd be fine. The cabin was secure, he'd shown her where he kept the rifle, and he'd be back before dark. Mara spent the morning doing laundry in the stream, Hope secured in a sling against her chest. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found herself humming, actually humming, as she scrubbed Calder's shirts against the smooth rocks. When was the last time she'd felt peaceful enough to hum? She'd just hung the last shirt on the line strung between 2 pines when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A metallic click that made every nerve in her body scream danger. Mara spun around to find herself facing 3 men on horseback. They'd come up the trail so quietly she hadn't heard them approach. Professionals, just like Dutch had warned. The one in front was thin and weathered, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His hand rested casually on the pistol at his hip. "Well now," he said, his voice carrying a false pleasantness that made Mara's skin crawl. "This must be the Ellsworth woman, and the baby that caused all the fuss." Mara's hand instinctively went to Hope, pressing her closer. "You're on private property. Leave. Now." The scarred man laughed. "Hear that, boys? She's giving us orders." He dismounted with lazy confidence. "Name's Pike, and we've come a long way to find you, Mrs. Ellsworth. Mr. Thorne sends his regards. Silas has no claim on me or my daughter." "See, that's where you're wrong." Pike pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This here is a writ from the territorial court. Seems there was some irregularity with that auction. The presiding sheriff may have been—" He paused, savoring the word. "Coerced. So Mr. Thorne's filed an appeal, and until it's settled, the child remains property of the estate. We're here to take her into custody." "That's insane. The gold was paid. The debt was settled." "Was it, though?" Pike stepped closer, and Mara saw the cruelty in his eyes. This was a man who enjoyed his work. Gold paid to a corrupt sheriff by a man wanted for questioning in connection with an assault on a deputy. See, Mr. Thorne did some digging. Turns out your mountain man friend has quite a past. Bar fights, disturbing the peace, threatening behavior. And that business with the rifle in the town square, that's assault with a deadly weapon. Mara's mind raced. It was all lies, all twisted half-truths designed to give Silas legal cover for what was really just revenge. But the paper in Pike's hand looked official enough, and out here, might made right more often than justice did. I'm not giving you my daughter. Pike sighed. Now, that's disappointing. We were hoping to do this civilized-like, but if you want to make it difficult. He gestured, and the other two men dismounted. One of them was massive, easily as big as Calder but gone to fat. The other was wiry and quick-moving, with eyes that never stopped scanning for threats. Mara backed toward the cabin. If she could get inside, bar the door, get to the rifle. Pike moved faster than she would have thought possible. His hand clamped around her arm like a vice, jerking her to a stop. Hope, crushed between them, began to scream. "Don't make me hurt you," Pike said softly. "Just hand over the baby, and we'll be gone. Simple as that." "Let go of me!" Mara drove her elbow back into Pike's ribs with all her strength. He grunted but didn't release her. Instead, he twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. "Told you we'd have to do this the hard way," he said to his companions. "Dutch, take the kid." The massive man reached for Hope, and something primal exploded in Mara. She bit down on Pike's hand with all the force she could muster, tasting blood. Pike howled and released her long enough for Mara to scramble away, still clutching Hope. She ran for the cabin, made it 3 steps before the wiry man tackled her from behind. She hit the ground hard, managing to twist at the last second so her body cushioned Hope's fall. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but hold her screaming daughter and wait for them to rip her away. Then a rifle shot split the air. Everyone froze. Calder stood at the edge of the clearing, still mounted on his horse, rifle raised. But he wasn't alone. Beside him rode Dutch and Sura, both armed, and behind them came 4 more men, trappers and hunters who'd apparently been at the trading post when Pike's group had stopped there asking questions. "Step away from them." Calder's voice was arctic cold. "Now!" Pike slowly raised his hands, his face calculating. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man. We've got legal paperwork. I don't care if you've got a signed letter from God himself." Calder dismounted, and the rifle never wavered from Pike's chest. "You touch them again, you die. Simple as that. You'd hang for killing us. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. Question is whether that piece of paper Silas gave you is worth dying for." The standoff stretched. Mara, still on the ground with Hope clutched against her, could barely breathe. The wiry man who'd tackled her had backed off, hands raised. The massive one called Dutch looked between Pike and Calder like a dog waiting for its master's command. Pike's hand twitched toward his pistol. Calder's rifle tracked the movement. "Do it. Please, give me the excuse." Something in Calder's voice, the absolute certainty that he would follow through, that he'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again, made Pike's hand freeze. "This isn't over," Pike said finally, backing toward his horse. "Mr. Thorne has resources. He has the law. You can't protect her forever." "Don't need forever, just need today." Calder's aim never wavered as all 3 men mounted up. "Tell Silas if he wants the girl, he can come himself. See how that works out for him." Pike spat in the dirt, then wheeled his horse around. The 3 of them rode off down the trail, and nobody moved until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then Calder was there, kneeling beside Mara, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. Hope's fine. Her voice cracked, and suddenly she was shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. "They were going to take her. They were going to—" I know. Calder pulled her against his chest, one arm around her shoulders, the other cradling Hope between them. "But they didn't. You're safe." "I've got you." Mara buried her face in his shirt and let herself break down, just for a moment. Let herself be weak, be scared, be human. And Calder held her through it, solid and unwavering, while Hope's cries gradually subsided into hiccups. Dutch approached cautiously. "You folks all right?" Calder looked up, his jaw tight. "How did they find us?" "Someone at the trading post must have talked. I'm sorry, Rourke. I tried to keep it quiet, but $100... "I know, not your fault." Calder stood, helping Mara to her feet. "But Pike's right about one thing. Silas won't stop. He'll send more men, better men, and next time I might not get here in time." "So what do we do?" Mara asked, finding her voice again. Calder looked at the cabin, at the home he'd built for himself and lost loved ones, at the sanctuary that was no longer safe. Something hardened in his expression, a decision being made. "We go on the offense," he said quietly. "We stop running and start hunting." That night, after Hope was asleep and Dutch and the others had returned to the trading post with promises to watch for more of Silas's men, Calder spread a map across the table. It showed the territory from Whitlock to the Canadian border, marked with all the locations he'd searched for Nira over the years. "Silas knows where we are now," Calder said, "which means this cabin's compromised. We need to move anyway, so we might as well use the opportunity." "Use it how?" Mara studied the map, noting the pattern of his searches, expanding circles radiating out from the site of the massacre. "You said the birthmark is the key, something that can't be hidden or changed." Calder's finger traced a route on the map. "There are 3 orphanages I haven't been able to access. Religious institutions that don't let strangers just walk in and inspect their children. But a woman with a baby? That's different." Mara's heart began to race as she understood. "They'd see me as someone who might be looking to place a child. Or adopt one." "Exactly. You'd have legitimate reason to be there, to see the children, to look for a crescent-shaped birthmark behind a little girl's left ear." Mara looked up at him. "Calder, she'd be 10 now. Do you really think—" "I think we've got nothing to lose by trying." His voice was rough with suppressed hope. "And I think Silas pushing us into motion might be the best thing that could have happened. We stop hiding, we finish what I should have finished 8 years ago. And if we don't find her?" The pain that crossed his face was visceral. "Then at least I'll know I tried everything. That I didn't just sit in a cabin pretending the world didn't exist while my daughter was out there somewhere." Mara placed her hand over his on the map. "We'll find her. I promise you, we'll find her." She wasn't sure she believed it, but she needed him to believe it, needed him to have that hope to cling to, because without hope, what was the point of any of this? They left before dawn 2 days later, everything they couldn't carry abandoned in the cabin. Calder had cached supplies and weapons at strategic points throughout the mountains over the years, a paranoid habit from his fugitive days that now proved invaluable. They traveled light and fast, avoiding the main trails, always watching their back trail for pursuit. The first orphanage was in a mining town called Silver Point, 3 days' hard ride to the north. It was run by Catholic sisters, a severe stone building that looked more like a prison than a place of refuge. Mara approached it alone, Hope in her arms, wearing her most respectable dress, and an expression of desperate hope. The sister who answered the door was ancient and suspicious. "We don't take children without proper documentation." "I'm not looking to place her," Mara said quickly. "My husband died in a mining accident. I'm trying to find his daughter from his first marriage. His family took her after his first wife died, but they won't tell me where she is. I just want to meet her, to make sure she's all right." It was a story they'd rehearsed, close enough to truth to be believable. The sister's expression softened fractionally. "Many children come to us from tragic circumstances. What is the girl's name?" "I don't know what they're calling her now, but she'd be about 10 years old, with dark hair and dark eyes. And she has a birthmark, crescent-shaped, right behind her left ear." The sister considered this. "We have several girls of that age. You may view them during their afternoon lessons, but you may not approach or speak to them without my permission." It was more than Mara had hoped for. She was led to a large room where 24 children sat at rough wooden desks, scratching at slates with chalk. The nun supervising them looked up with a frown, but the older sister explained the situation in rapid French. Mara's eyes swept the room, searching. There were 4 girls who might be the right age. She watched as they worked, willing one of them to turn her head, to show the telltale mark. But when they finally filed out for their afternoon chores, Mara had seen behind all 4 girls' ears. No birthmark, no Nira. She left the orphanage with a heavy heart and met Calder at the rendezvous point outside of town. The look on her face told him everything. Next one, was all he said. The second orphanage was in a railroad town called Cedar Falls, 2 days to the east. This one was run by Presbyterians, less severe but more bureaucratic. Mara spun her story again, this time to a thin-lipped administrator who kept meticulous records. I'll need to verify your identity and your relationship to the child in question before allowing any contact. Of course. I understand. Mara's heart sank. This was going to take days, maybe weeks, and they didn't have that kind of time. But that night, as she and Calder made camp in a grove of aspens outside town, a figure approached their fire. Mara's hand went to the rifle, but Calder held up a hand. Easy. I know her. The woman who stepped into the firelight was native. Shoshone, Mara realized, seeing the familiar features. She was elderly, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Calder Rourke, the woman said in accented English. I heard you were looking for your daughter. Calder shot to his feet. Little dear, I thought you were dead. Many thought so, easier that way. The old woman settled herself by the fire with a grace that belied her age. I survived the massacre, hid in the rocks while the soldiers burned everything. Afterward, I searched for Nira, same as you, and I found something. Mara leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. The soldiers who took the children that day, they brought them to the fort first. I have a nephew who worked there as a scout. He saw the little ones processed. Most were sent to reservation schools, but three were special cases. 3 were young enough and light-skinned enough to pass for white. Where did they send them? Calder's voice was shaking. 2 went to families back east, officers looking to adopt. But the third, Little Deer pulled a scrap of paper from her pouch. The third went to an orphanage in Whitlock. The world seemed to tilt. Mara grabbed Calder's arm to steady herself. Whitlock? You mean she's been there the whole time? Right under Silas Thorne's nose? Not the main orphanage, Little Deer said. The asylum. The place where they send children who are difficult, who don't fit. It's run by a woman named Mrs. Grayson. Hard woman, cruel, but she takes the children nobody else wants. Calder looked like he'd been struck. I searched Whitlock. I searched every... Did you search the asylum? Little Deer's voice was gentle. Most people don't even know it exists. It's on the edge of town, past the old mine. Mrs. Grayson doesn't advertise, doesn't want people asking questions about the children in her care. Why are you telling me this now? Calder asked. Why wait 8 years? Because I only learned this 3 weeks ago, when my nephew finally returned from the East. He'd been carrying the guilt of what happened to those children all these years. When he heard you were still searching, still alive, she touched Calder's hand. Go to Whitlock. Find the asylum. But be careful. Silas Thorne has many eyes in that town. She stood to leave, but Mara called out, Wait, how will we recognize her? If her name's been changed, if she doesn't remember... The birthmark, Little Deer said. Anahita's mark. The crescent moon. That cannot be hidden or changed. And if she truly is your daughter, Calder, you will know her. Blood calls to blood. Then she was gone, melting back into the darkness as silently as she'd appeared. Calder stood frozen, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She's been there, all this time, in Whitlock. While I was searching everywhere else, she was right there. We don't know for certain yet, Mara said carefully. I know. He looked at her, and the hope and fear warring in his eyes was almost too much to bear. I feel it. Here. He pressed a fist to his chest. She's there. My daughter is in Whitlock. Then we go to Whitlock. Mara took his hands, but carefully. Silas knows we're alive. His men are looking for us. If we walk into that town, we're walking into a trap. I don't care. Yes, you do, because if we get caught or killed, who saves Nira then? Mara squeezed his hands hard. We do this smart. We plan. We prepare. And we don't make a move until we're certain. It took everything Calder had to nod agreement. Mara could see him vibrating with the need to act, to run straight to Whitlock and tear that asylum apart board by board until he found his daughter. But he'd learned patience in 8 years of searching. He could manage a few more days. They traveled back toward Whitlock by a circuitous route, taking twice as long as necessary to ensure they weren't followed. Along the way, they stopped at Dutch's trading post one more time to gather supplies and information. "Silas has got people watching every trail into town," Dutch reported grimly. "He's convinced you'll come back. Got a reward posted, $500 for information leading to your capture." "What about the asylum?" Mara asked. "What do you know about it?" Dutch exchanged glances with Tsura, who nodded slowly. "Not much. Mrs. Grayson keeps to herself, takes in children from all over, orphans, runaways, native kids from the boarding schools who didn't work out. Supposed to be rehabilitating them, but—" She shook her head. "The children I've seen from that place look scared, broken." "How many children?" Calder asked. 30, maybe 40 at any given time. They work the vegetable gardens, do laundry for the wealthier families in town. You see them around sometimes, always in groups, always with Mrs. Grayson or one of her assistants watching. "So we watch them back," Mara said. "We find a vantage point where we can observe without being seen. We identify which children are the right age, we look for the birthmark, and then I get her out," Calder finished. "We get her out," Mara corrected. "This isn't your fight alone anymore." Something shifted in Calder's expression, a recognition that he was no longer the solitary hunter he'd been for 8 years. He had allies now. He had help. And maybe, just maybe, that would make the difference. They spent a week watching Whitlock from the surrounding hills, learning the rhythms of the town. Mara posed as a widow seeking work, slipping into town during market days to gather information and supplies, while Calder stayed hidden with hope. Through careful questions and careful listening, they built a picture of the asylum and its inhabitants. Mrs. Grayson was exactly as harsh as Little Deer had suggested, an angular woman in her 50s who ran the asylum like a military camp. The children were kept busy from dawn to dusk with work and lessons, allowed little time for play or rest. Townsfolk generally avoided the place, uncomfortable with the implications of its existence. And then, on the 8th day of watching, they saw her. A girl emerged from the asylum's main building carrying a basket of laundry. She was small for 10, thin and hollow-cheeked, with dark hair pulled back in a severe braid. She wore a gray institutional dress and moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd learned not to draw attention to herself. But it was her eyes that made Calder's breath catch, dark and defiant, still holding a spark of something that years of captivity hadn't been able to extinguish. "That's her," he breathed. "That's my daughter." "We can't know for certain until we see the birthmark," Mara cautioned, but her heart was racing, because even from this distance she could see the resemblance. The girl had Calder's strong jaw, Anahita's high cheekbones, a unique combination that marked her as clearly as any birthmark. They watched as the girl, whose nameplate read Lena, according to Dutch's inquiries, went about her work. She was efficient but joyless, mechanical. When one of the younger children dropped their basket, Lena helped them gather the scattered clothes without a word, then returned to her own task. "We need a plan to get close to her," Mara said, "to verify the birthmark and to—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "To prepare her. Calder, she's been there for 8 years. She won't remember you. We can't just snatch her and run. She'll be terrified." "I know." The words seemed to cost him physical pain. "But how do we approach her? Mrs. Grayson watches those children like a hawk." "Leave that to me," Mara said, an idea forming. "I have a plan, but you're not going to like it." She was right. He didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with the logic of it either. 3 days later, Mara Ellsworth walked up to the front door of the Whitlock Children's Asylum and knocked. When Mrs. Grayson answered, tall, severe, with eyes like chips of ice, Mara took a deep breath and delivered the lie they'd practiced. "My name is Mara Ellsworth. My husband recently died, leaving me with a 5-month-old daughter and no means of support. I'm looking for work, any work, and I heard you sometimes employ women here to help with the children." Mrs. Grayson looked her up and down with an expression of profound distaste. "We don't pay much." "I don't need much. Just enough to feed my daughter and keep a roof over our heads. The work is hard. The hours are long. And the children, Mrs. Grayson's lip curled. The children here are not like normal children. They're damaged goods, most of them. Savages and half-breeds and God knows what else. If you're looking for gratitude or affection, you've come to the wrong place. Every word made Mara want to put her fist through the woman's teeth, but she forced herself to nod meekly. I understand, ma'am. I just need the work. Mrs. Grayson considered her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Very well, you can start tomorrow, 6 in the morning sharp. A minute late and you're dismissed. And just like that, Mara had walked into the heart of enemy territory. The asylum smelled of lye soap and despair. Mara arrived before dawn that first morning, Hope strapped to her chest in a sling, and was immediately put to work scrubbing floors while Mrs. Grayson outlined the rules in a voice that could have etched glass. The children wake at 5. They dress themselves, make their beds to military standard, and report for morning inspection by 5:30. Breakfast is at 6. Porridge. Nothing more. Any child who complains goes without. After breakfast, the older ones go to their work assignments while the younger ones attend lessons. You will supervise the laundry detail. Mara nodded, keeping her eyes downcast, playing the desperate widow who couldn't afford to question anything. Around them, children moved through the dim hallways like ghosts, silent, efficient, their faces carefully blank. She caught glimpses of bruises on thin arms, saw the way they flinched when Mrs. Grayson's shadow fell across them. It took every ounce of self-control not to grab Hope and run. The laundry detail consisted of 8 girls ranging from about 8 to 12 years old. They worked in a steam-filled room behind the main building, stirring massive pots of boiling water, scrubbing stains against washboards until their knuckles bled, hanging endless loads of sheets and institutional gray dresses on lines that stretched across the yard. And among them, moving with mechanical precision, was Lena. Up close, the resemblance to Calder was even more striking. She had his ice-blue eyes, though hers held a wariness that made Mara's heart ache. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it must have hurt, revealing a face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so carefully expressionless. Mara forced herself to wait, to observe, to not rush. For 3 days, she simply did her job, supervising without cruelty, helping when the younger girls struggled with the heavy washpots, keeping Hope nearby in a makeshift crib fashioned from a laundry basket. Mrs. Grayson watched her like a hawk at first, but gradually seemed satisfied that Mara was sufficiently cowed and desperate. It was on the 4th day that Mara finally saw it. One of the younger girls had burned herself on the edge of a washpot and was crying quietly, trying not to draw attention. Lena moved to help her, tilting her head to examine the burn, and for just a moment her hair shifted. There, behind her left ear, clear as day, a crescent-shaped birthmark. Mara's breath caught. She turned away quickly, pretending to check on Hope, her hands shaking. They'd found her. After 8 years of searching, endless dead ends and false hopes, they'd actually found Calder's daughter. Now came the hard part. That evening, after the children had been fed their meager dinner and sent to their dormitories, Mara lingered in the laundry room. Mrs. Grayson had already retired to her private quarters. The woman kept strict hours and expected her staff to do the same. But Mara had noticed that Lena often stayed late, finishing tasks that the younger girls had botched, trying to prevent them from being punished. Sure enough, as the sun set and the asylum grew quiet, Lena slipped back into the laundry room. She froze when she saw Mara, her whole body going rigid with the expectation of punishment. "It's all right," Mara said softly. "I'm not going to report you. I know you're just trying to help the little ones." Lena said nothing, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. In a place like this, kindness was probably a trap. "What's your name?" Mara asked, even though she already knew. "Lena." The girl's voice was hoarse, as if she wasn't used to using it. "Lena Grayson." The surname made Mara's stomach turn. Mrs. Grayson had given the girl her own name, claiming her like property. "How long have you been here, Lena?" "Always." Lena moved to the washpot she'd come to check, her movements efficient and practiced. "Mrs. Grayson says I came here when I was very small. Don't remember anywhere else." "Do you ever wonder about your family? About where you came from before?" Lena's hands stilled for just a moment. "Mrs. Grayson says I'm lucky to be here. Says my real family didn't want me. Says I should be grateful she took me in when nobody else would. The casual cruelty of it made Mara want to scream. Instead, she kept her voice gentle. What if that wasn't true? What if your real family did want you, but couldn't find you? Lena turned to look at her fully for the first time, and Mara saw intelligence in those blue eyes, sharp and calculating despite years of institutional suppression. Why are you asking me this? Because I know what it's like to have someone try to take your child away. Mara touched Hope, sleeping peacefully in her sling. And I know what it's like to be told you're worthless when you're not. You should leave, Lena said abruptly, before Mrs. Grayson finds you talking to me. She doesn't like the staff getting familiar with the children. I'm not afraid of Mrs. Grayson. Then you're stupid. But there was something in Lena's voice, not hostility, but warning, almost like concern. She's meaner than she seems, and she's connected to powerful people. Mr. Thorne from the mine, he's her cousin. She does him favors sometimes. Mara's blood ran cold. Of course. Of course Silas and Mrs. Grayson were related. In a town like Whitlock, cruelty recognized cruelty and formed alliances. What kind of favors? Lena shrugged, but her face had gone carefully blank again. Don't know. Don't ask. Safer that way. She moved toward the door, clearly done with this conversation, but Mara couldn't let her leave. Not yet. Not without planting the seed that might save her life. Lena, the girl paused. If I told you that someone was looking for you, someone who loved you very much and never stopped searching, would you want to know? Lena's back went rigid. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, without turning around, she said, People like me don't get happy endings, Mrs. Ellsworth. Better not to hope. She left, and Mara stood alone in the steam-filled room, her heart breaking for the child who'd learned not to dream of rescue. Over the next week, Mara slowly built a fragile trust with Lena. It wasn't easy. The girl had clearly learned that trust led to betrayal, that kindness was usually a prelude to cruelty. But Mara persisted, always gentle, never pushing, simply being present in a way that made no demands. She learned that Lena was the oldest of the asylum children, that she often protected the younger ones from Mrs. Grayson's worst rages, taking punishments meant for them. She learned that Lena could read and write better than most adults, having taught herself from discarded newspapers and books she found in the trash. She learned that despite everything, the girl had a fierce spark of defiance that years of abuse hadn't quite extinguished. And she learned that Silas Thorne visited the asylum twice a month, always leaving Mrs. Grayson with envelopes of cash. He's looking for someone, Lena confided one evening when they were alone in the laundry room. She'd started seeking out these moments with Mara, starved for adult conversation that didn't involve orders or criticism. A woman and a baby. Mrs. Grayson asks all the new staff about them. She asked about you, actually. Wanted to know if you'd seen a big mountain man on your way into town. Mara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice level. What did you tell her? Nothing. I don't tell her anything I don't have to. Lena looked at her directly. But you should know, she's suspicious of you. Says it's too much of a coincidence, you showing up right when Mr. Thorne is searching for someone. I'm just a widow looking for work. Maybe. Lena's eyes were too knowing. Or maybe you're something else. Either way, be careful. Mrs. Grayson might seem like just a mean old woman, but she's dangerous, and so is her cousin. That night, Mara met Calder at their prearranged spot, an abandoned mining shack on the outskirts of town. He'd been hiding there for 2 weeks, going slowly mad with the need to act, surviving on the supplies Mara smuggled out and the information she brought each night. It's her, Mara confirmed. I saw the birthmark. And Calder, she looks so much like you, the eyes especially. How Mrs. Grayson doesn't see it. She sees what she wants to see. Calder's voice was tight. A convenient orphan she can use for cheap labor. How is she? Is she hurt? She's surviving. Mara chose her words carefully. She's smart, she's strong, she's learned to be careful. But she's been hurt, Calder. Not just physically. 8 years in that place has taught her not to hope, not to trust. When we get her out, she's not going to run into your arms. She won't remember you. I know. He looked away, jaw clenched against emotion. I just need her safe, that's all. She doesn't have to remember me or love me or... His voice broke. I just need her safe. Mara took his hand. We'll get her out. But we need a plan. Mrs. Grayson is suspicious of me already, and Silas has the whole town watching for you. We can't just grab Lena and run. Why not? Because she won't come willingly, not with strangers. And if we try to force her, she'll fight, she'll scream, she'll draw attention. We need to prepare her first. We need to give her a reason to trust us. How? Mara pulled out a small object from her pocket, the wooden bird carving Calder had made for her 10 years ago. You make things, beautiful things, and Lena is smart enough to recognize a message when she sees one. Understanding dawned in Calder's eyes. You want me to make something for her, something that connects to her past, something only her father would know to make. That night, by the light of a single candle, Calder carved. His knife moved with the sureness of long practice, shaping wood into memory. When he was finished, he held up a small figure, a woman with long hair holding a baby, both wrapped in a blanket decorated with stars. Anahita used to wrap Nira in her star blanket, he said quietly, every night, and she'd sing the mountain song until Nira fell asleep. If anything survived in her memory, it would be that. Mara took the carving carefully. It was exquisite, every detail perfect, from the pattern of stars to the tender way the woman held the child. I'll give it to her tomorrow. Tell her, Calder's voice roughened. Tell her that her father never stopped looking, never stopped loving her. Tell her he's sorry it took so long. The next day, Mara waited until the afternoon, when Mrs. Grayson was occupied with a visiting inspector, and the children were scattered across their various work assignments. She found Lena alone in the laundry room, as usual, finishing tasks the younger girls had left incomplete. I have something for you. Mara pulled out the carving. Someone wanted you to have this. Lena took it automatically, then froze as she really looked at it. Her fingers traced the star pattern on the blanket, and something cracked in her carefully maintained expression. Where did you get this? Her voice was barely a whisper. From someone who's been searching for you for a very long time. I don't understand. But Lena's hands were shaking, clutching the carving like a lifeline. I've seen this. In dreams, a woman singing, stars on a blanket. But that's not real. Mrs. Grayson says I was born here, that I never had a real family. Mrs. Grayson lied. Mara knelt beside the girl, keeping her voice low. Your real name isn't Lena Grayson. It's Nira Rourke. Your mother's name was Anahita, and she loved you more than life itself. Your father's name is Calder, and he spent 8 years trying to find you. Lena's breathing had gone rapid and shallow. No, that's not... Why would she lie? Because 8 years ago, soldiers attacked your mother's village. They killed many people, including your mother, and they took the children who survived. You were 2 years old. You were brought to Fort Collins first, then to the asylum here. Your father was wounded in the attack. By the time he recovered and started searching, you disappeared into the system. This is insane. But Lena was still clutching the carving, and tears were streaming down her face. If this person, if my supposed father, really exists, why hasn't he come for me? Because until 2 weeks ago, he didn't know where you were. And because walking into Whitlock is dangerous for him, Silas Thorne wants him dead. Understanding flickered in Lena's eyes. The mountain man, the one Mr. Thorne is looking for. That's him? Yes. And you're the woman with the baby? Yes. Lena backed away, shaking her head. You need to leave, both of you. If Mr. Thorne finds you here, we're not leaving without you. Mara stood, keeping her voice firm. Nira, your father has been searching for you for 8 years. He's not giving up now, but we need your help. We need you to be ready when the time comes to run. I can't just leave. The younger children, they need me. If I disappear, Mrs. Grayson will take it out on them. The fact that Lena's first thought was for the other children, despite her own shock, spoke volumes about the person she'd become. Mara's heart swelled with admiration and grief in equal measure. Then we'll have to make sure she can't, Mara said. We'll have to expose what she's been doing here. The abuse, the exploitation, her connection to Silas. But first we need proof. Lena was silent for a long moment, her fingers still tracing the star pattern on the wooden carving. When she finally looked up, There was something new in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. "Mrs. Grayson keeps records," she said slowly. "In her office. Files on all the children, where we came from, how much the government pays for our care, which ones she's loaned out for private labor. If you want proof, it's in there. Can you get access?" "Maybe. She sends me to clean her office sometimes. But it's always locked when she's not there, and she keeps the keys on her person." Mara's mind raced. They needed those records, both to verify Lena's identity legally and to expose the asylum's abuses. But they also needed to move fast. Silas's net was tightening, and sooner or later someone would make the connection between the widow working at the asylum and the woman he was hunting. "Tonight," Mara said, making the decision. "Can you get me into the office tonight?" "Are you crazy? If we're caught, we'll deal with it. But Lena, Nira, we're running out of time. Silas knows I'm in town. It's only a matter of time before he figures out where." Lena looked at her for a long moment, then at the carving in her hands, then back at Mara. Whatever she saw in Mara's face seemed to convince her. "There's a window," she said quietly, "on the east side of Mrs. Grayson's office. It doesn't latch properly. If you came from outside after lights out, I could let you in through there. But you'd have to be quiet. Mrs. Grayson's quarters are directly above." "I can be quiet. And if she catches you, you don't know me. You don't say anything about me helping you." "Lena, promise me." The girl's voice was fierce. "I've survived here for 8 years by not making waves. If you get caught, I can't be connected to it." Mara wanted to argue, to promise they wouldn't get caught, to assure her everything would be fine, but Lena deserved honesty. "I promise." They parted ways before anyone could notice them talking. Mara finished her shift in a daze, her mind already working through the logistics of what they were about to attempt. When she finally left the asylum that evening, hope fussing against her chest, she went straight to the mining shack where Calder waited. "Tonight," she said without preamble, "we're going to break into Mrs. Grayson's office and get the records. Lena's helping us." "Absolutely not." Calder was on his feet immediately. "If you're caught, then we're caught. But Calder, we need those records. Not just for proof, but for Lena. She needs to see the truth in black and white. She needs documentation that shows who she really is." "I'll do it. You stay here with Hope. You're 6.5 feet tall and built like a mountain. You can't exactly sneak through a building full of sleeping children. I'm small, I'm quiet, and I know the layout. It has to be me." They argued for another hour, but Mara was immovable. Finally, Calder relented with the condition that he would be nearby, watching, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. At midnight, Mara approached the asylum from the east, moving through shadows like a ghost. The window Lena had described was indeed slightly ajar, and when Mara tapped softly, it opened immediately. Lena's pale face appeared, and she helped Mara climb through into the darkened office. "Mrs. Grayson took a sleeping draft tonight," Lena whispered. "She does that sometimes when her back hurts, but we still need to be quiet." The office was as austere as its owner. A large desk, filing cabinets, shelves of ledgers. Lena produced a small candle and lit it, shielding the flame with her hand. "The children's files are in the bottom drawer. She thinks nobody knows, but I've seen her accessing them." They moved to the filing cabinet. The drawer was locked, but Mara had come prepared with a thin piece of metal she'd fashioned from a nail. It took 3 agonizing minutes of fumbling before the lock clicked open. Inside were rows of folders, each labeled with a child's name and a number. Mara's fingers flew through them, searching. There. Lena Grayson, number 247. She pulled it out and opened it by candlelight. The first document made her breath catch. Transfer order, Fort Collins Holding Facility to Whitlock Children's Asylum. Child number 247. Female, approximately 24 months, mixed heritage. Presumed half Shoshone. Parents deceased. No living relatives. Authorized for placement under the Indian Appropriation Act of 1888. "That's not true," Lena breathed, reading over Mara's shoulder. "My parents aren't dead. You said your mother died in the massacre. Your father survived. They lied on the paperwork to make you easier to place." Mara flipped through more pages. "Look, here's the original documentation from Fort Collins. Child recovered from hostile attack on Shoshone encampment. Father presumed deceased. Child shows signs of distress and refuses to respond to English commands. I would have spoken Shoshone, Lena whispered. If I was 2 years old, that's what I would have known. Exactly. And here, Mara pulled out another document. Payment records. The government pays Mrs. Grayson $20 per month per child for their care and education. But look at these expense reports she files. She's claiming less than $5 per child in actual costs. Where's the rest of the money going? To her, Lena said bitterly. And to paying Mr. Thorne for his protection. That's why she lets him use the asylum children for labor in his mines sometimes. It's all connected. Mara was about to respond when they heard it, footsteps in the hallway above. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that paused at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Grayson was awake. Lena's eyes went wide with panic. She blew out the candle instantly, plunging them into darkness. Mara shoved the file inside her dress and eased the filing cabinet drawer closed as quietly as possible. The footsteps started down the stairs. Go, Lena hissed. The window, now! But Mara hesitated. If she left and Mrs. Grayson found Lena in the office, the girl would be beaten, or worse. Come with me, we'll run right now. And go where? I can't leave the others, I told you, and if we both disappear, she'll know I helped you. She'll take it out on them. Lena pushed Mara toward the window. Go. I'll tell her I heard a noise and came to investigate. Just go. Mara wanted to argue, but the footsteps were getting closer. She squeezed Lena's hand once, a promise, a bond, then slipped through the window just as the office door began to open. She landed in the dirt and rolled into the shadows, her heart hammering. Through the window, she could hear Mrs. Grayson's cold voice. What are you doing in here, Lena? I heard a noise, ma'am. Thought someone might be trying to break in. I came to check. In the middle of the night? Without waking me first? I didn't want to disturb you, ma'am. You take so few nights of good sleep as it is. The flattery was calculated, and Mara could almost hear Mrs. Grayson's internal deliberation. Finally, get back to bed, and if you hear noises again, you wake me immediately. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Footsteps retreated. A door closed. And Mara exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. She made it back to the mining shack just before dawn, the stolen file clutched against her chest like armor. Calder was pacing like a caged animal, and he nearly crushed her with relief when she appeared. Thank God! I was about to storm that place. We got it. Mara laid out the documents. Everything we need, proof of her identity, proof of Mrs. Grayson's fraud, connections to Silas. It's all here. They spent the next hour going through the file, and with each page, Calder's expression grew grimmer. By the time they reached the medical records, which showed multiple injuries to Lena over the years, all attributed to accidents, his hands were shaking with barely contained rage. We get her out tonight, he said flatly. No more waiting, no more planning. Tonight. Calder, we need to think this through. I've thought it through for 8 years. His voice cracked. Every day she's in that place, she's being hurt. Every day I wait is another day I'm failing her. We get her out tonight, and then we run as far and as fast as we can. And Silas? His men are everywhere. The moment we make a move, they'll know. Let them know. Let them try to stop me. Calder's eyes were ice and fury. I've spent 8 years being careful, being patient, following rules that were designed to keep people like me powerless. No more. Tonight, we stop playing their game. Mara looked at him and saw not just determination, but desperation. He was right at the edge, held together by nothing but willpower and hope. If they didn't move soon, he would break. All right, she said quietly. Tonight. But we do it my way. We get Lena, we get evidence to the sheriff, the real sheriff, not Drummond who's in Silas's pocket, but someone who answers to territorial authority. And we make sure those other children are protected before we disappear. How? A grim smile crossed Mara's face. By making sure that when we leave, the whole town knows what Silas Thorne and his cousin have been doing. By making it impossible for them to hide anymore. She outlined her plan, and with each detail, Calder's expression shifted from despair to determination to something that might have been hope. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It would require perfect timing and more than a little luck. But it just might work. The gallows had been standing in Whitlock's town square for 3 days, waiting. Sheriff Drummond had announced Calder Rourke's execution with the grim satisfaction of a man who knew which side his bread was buttered on. The mountain man had been captured attempting to kidnap a child from the asylum, Drummond claimed, resisting arrest, assaulting deputies, violating the terms of the territorial court order. The trial had been a formality, 20 minutes in front of a judge who owed Silas Thorne for his appointment. Now, as dawn broke on the 4th day, the entire town gathered to watch justice being served. Mara stood at the edge of the crowd, hope hidden beneath her shawl, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Everything. Calder was led out in chains, flanked by 4 armed deputies. Even restrained, he looked dangerous, a caged bear that might break free at any moment. His face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes were clear and cold as winter ice. They swept the crowd until they found Mara, and something passed between them. A promise. A prayer. Silas Thorne stood on the courthouse steps like a king surveying his domain, resplendent in his expensive suit despite the early hour. Mrs. Grayson stood beside him, severe and satisfied. They'd won, their expressions said. The troublemakers would be eliminated, the natural order restored. They had no idea what was coming. Sheriff Drummond mounted the gallows platform, pulling out a scroll with theatrical flourish. Calder Rourke, you have been found guilty of kidnapping, assault, and resisting arrest. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out immediately. Do you have any last words? Calder's voice carried across the silent square. Yeah, I've got words. He turned to face the crowd, and despite the chains, despite the noose waiting behind him, he stood tall and unbroken. 8 years ago, the United States cavalry attacked a peaceful Shoshone village in the mountains north of here. They killed women and children. They burned homes. And they stole the survivors, children too young to remember their real names, their real families. Those children were processed like livestock and distributed to institutions across the territory. One of those children ended up here, in Whitlock, in an asylum run by Mrs. Grayson. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Grayson's face flushed red. This is preposterous. Sheriff, silence him. But Drummond hesitated. Something in Calder's voice commanded attention, and the crowd was listening now, hungry for scandal. That child was my daughter, Calder continued. Nera Rourke. She was 2 years old when they took her. Her mother, my wife, was shot dead trying to protect her. I spent 8 years searching every orphanage, every fort, every church placement agency. And I finally found her. Here, being worked like a slave under a false name. Lies, Mrs. Grayson shrieked. All lies. This savage is trying to... Then explain this. Mara's voice rang out as she pushed through the crowd. She'd been waiting for this moment, for the exact right time to strike. She held up the stolen file, papers fluttering in the morning breeze. Explain why your records show a child transferred from Fort Collins with no name, no family, no history. Explain why the government pays you $20 per month per child, but your expense reports show you spending less than $5. Explain why there are medical records documenting injuries that you claim were accidents, but that any doctor would recognize as abuse. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Mara saw faces she recognized, shopkeepers, miners, farmers, people who'd turned away when her daughter was auctioned, but who might find a spine when confronted with evidence of something even they couldn't ignore. Silas stepped forward, his cane clicking against the wooden steps. That woman is a wanted criminal. She's in league with this murderer. Sheriff, arrest her immediately. On what charge? Mara shot back. Having my baby stolen and sold to pay debts I never incurred? Or is the real crime daring to stand up to you? You're hysterical, clearly unfit. I'm not the one running an asylum where children are beaten and starved. Mara turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you have seen those children working in town? How many of you noticed they're too thin, too quiet, too scared? How many of you looked away because it was easier than asking questions? The silence that fell was damning. Mara saw shame on some faces, anger on others. She pressed her advantage. Mrs. Grayson is Silas Thorne's cousin. She runs the asylum. He provides protection. Together, they've been exploiting government funds meant for orphans and using the children as cheap labor for his mines. It's all documented in these records. Every fraudulent expense report, every payment under the table, every child loaned out for work that should have been paid wages. Enough! Silas's composure finally cracked. He gestured sharply to his men scattered throughout the crowd. Take her, take the child, and proceed with the execution. Now! 3 of Silas's hired thugs started toward Mara, but the crowd had begun to shift. Uncertain, angry, no longer unified in their passive complicity. Someone blocked the thugs' path. Margaret Chen, the Chinese laundress who'd helped Mara escape weeks ago. Let her speak, Margaret said firmly. Get out of the way, woman, one of the thugs growled. No. And then, astonishingly, old Mr. Peterson from the general store stepped up beside Margaret. Then the blacksmith. Then Dutch, who'd apparently ridden into town at dawn with a dozen trappers and hunters at his back. The crowd was fracturing, choosing sides, and Silas could see his control slipping away. This is rebellion, he shouted. Sheriff, restore order! But Drummond was looking at his deputies, seeing the same uncertainty in their faces that filled the square. This wasn't a simple execution anymore. This was something that could tear the town apart, and lawmen knew when they were on the wrong side of history. That's when Lena appeared. She stepped out from the asylum building at the edge of the square, and behind her came the other children, 37 of them, ranging from 6 to 15 years old. They moved in silent formation, and every single one of them carried something, proof, evidence. Documents stolen from Mrs. Grayson's office in the chaos of the morning, work logs showing children laboring 16-hour days, medical records documenting systematic abuse, contracts selling their labor to Silas's mines for pennies. Lena walked straight through the parting crowd until she stood before the gallows. She looked up at Calder, seeing him clearly for the first time in 8 years, and her voice carried with unexpected strength. My name is Nira Rourke. I was born in a Shoshone village in 1867. My mother's name was Anahita. She died protecting me when I was 2 years old. My father is Calder Rourke. She touched the crescent birthmark behind her left ear. This mark proves who I am, and everything he said is true. The square erupted. Mrs. Grayson lunged for Lena with a shriek of rage, but Dutch caught her arm and held her fast. Silas was shouting orders that nobody followed. The deputies looked to Drummond, who looked at the crowd of angry townspeople, then at the children standing in silent testimony, then at the noose waiting for Calder. Cut him down, Drummond said quietly. What? One of the deputies blinked in confusion. I said cut him down. Drummond's voice gained strength. This whole thing stinks worse than week old fish. We're not hanging anybody until the territorial marshal can review the evidence. You can't do this, Silas advanced on the sheriff. I own you, Drummond. You do what I say or what? Drummond finally found his spine. You'll destroy me like you've destroyed everyone else in this town? I'm tired, Thorne. Tired of your threats. Tired of your money. Tired of pretending I don't see what you are. He gestured to his deputies. Take Mrs. Grayson into custody, and somebody get Mr. Thorne off my gallows before I decide he needs to stand trial too. Chaos descended. Silas's remaining men tried to fight their way out, but they were vastly outnumbered by angry townspeople who'd finally reached their breaking point. Mrs. Grayson screamed and struggled as she was dragged toward the courthouse, and Calder, his chains finally struck off, descended the gallows steps with the unsteady gait of a man who'd come within minutes of death. He made it 3 steps before Lena reached him. They stood facing each other, father and daughter, strangers who shared blood and grief and 8 years of stolen time. Calder seemed afraid to move, afraid to breathe, as if one wrong gesture might shatter this impossible moment. I don't remember you, Lena said, her voice shaking. I don't remember my mother, or the village, or anything before the asylum, but I remember the star blanket and the song. Her eyes filled with tears. Someone used to sing to me about mountains and rivers. I thought it was just a dream. It wasn't a dream, Calder's voice broke. It was real. You were real, and I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry it took me this long to find you. Mrs. Ellsworth showed me the carving, the woman with the baby and the stars. Lena pulled it from her pocket, and it was worn smooth from being held. Was that my mother? Yes. Anahita. She loved you more than anything in this world. We both did. We do. Calder's hands flexed at his sides, clearly desperate to reach for her but afraid of rejection. I know I'm a stranger to you. I know I can't just expect you to. Lena stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, but then Calder's arms came around her and he held his daughter like she might disappear if he let go. His whole body shook with sobs he'd held back for 8 years, and Lena clung to him just as tightly, crying for a mother she couldn't remember and a father she'd never thought she'd find. Mara watched through her own tears, hope pressed against her heart. Around them, the square had gone quiet. Even the most hardened miners seemed moved by the reunion unfolding before them. But the moment couldn't last. Not yet. Silas Thorne had retreated to the edge of the crowd, his face purple with rage. Mara saw him gesture to someone in the shadows, one of his men who hadn't been caught up in the melee. She saw the glint of metal as the man drew his pistol, aiming at Calder's unprotected back. "Gun!" Mara screamed. Everything happened at once. Calder spun, pushing Lena behind him. The gunman fired, and the shot went wide as Dutch tackled him from the side. But 2 more of Silas's men emerged from the crowd, weapons drawn, and suddenly the square was erupting into violence. Mara grabbed Lena and pulled her down as bullets flew overhead. Hope was screaming, and people were running in all directions, trying to find cover. She saw Calder drop and roll, coming up with a pistol he'd taken from one of the fallen deputies. He returned fire with lethal accuracy, dropping one of Silas's men with a shot to the shoulder. "Get the children to safety!" someone shouted, probably Drummond. The asylum children scattered like startled birds, seeking shelter in doorways and behind wagons. Through the chaos, Mara saw Silas mounting his horse, clearly intending to flee while his men provided cover. She couldn't let him escape. Everything they'd done, all the risk and pain and fear, would be for nothing if Silas slipped away to plot revenge from some distant city. Without thinking, Mara thrust Hope into Lena's arms. "Get her somewhere safe, please!" Before Lena could respond, Mara was running. She dodged through panicked townspeople and vaulted over an overturned fruit cart, her eyes locked on Silas's retreating form. He was heading for the alley beside the courthouse, where his black carriage waited. Mara had always been fast. Years of hauling water and chopping wood had given her a wiry strength that belied her size. She caught up to Silas just as he reached his carriage, grabbed his coat, and hauled backward with all her might. Silas stumbled, caught off guard. He spun with his cane raised like a weapon, and Mara barely dodged the silver-topped head as it whistled past her ear. "You stupid girl!" Silas snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? I will destroy you. I will destroy everyone you love. You'll do nothing." Mara's voice was ice. "Because you're finished, Silas. Your cousin is in custody. Your men are scattered. And the whole town just watched you try to murder a man on the gallows in front of his daughter. You're done." "You think this ends here?" Silas laughed, high and slightly manic. "I have friends in the territorial government. I have judges in my pocket. I have resources you can't imagine. This is a minor setback, nothing more. In 6 months, I'll own this town again. And when I do, I'll make sure you watch me take that baby of yours and sell her to the highest bidder. Then I'll do the same with the breed girl. Then I'll—" The gunshot cut him off. Silas looked down in shock at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at Mara. But she wasn't holding a gun. She turned to see Lena standing at the mouth of the alley, Hope secured against her chest with one arm, a smoking rifle in her other hand. "Nobody threatens my family," Lena said quietly. Silas collapsed against his carriage, the life draining from his eyes. His last expression was one of utter disbelief that he, untouchable, powerful Silas Thorne, could be brought down by a half-Shoshone girl he'd treated as property. Then he was gone. Mara ran to Lena and took Hope, checking frantically to make sure her daughter was unharmed. Lena lowered the rifle with shaking hands, staring at what she'd done. "I killed him," she whispered. "I killed a man." "You protected your family," Calder said, appearing at her side. He gently took the rifle from her hands. "And you saved Mara's life. That's not murder. That's justice. The law won't see it that way. The law will see what the witnesses say they saw." Drummond emerged from the chaos of the square, surveying the scene with weary eyes. And what I saw was a young woman defending herself and others from a man who was threatening violence after orchestrating an illegal execution. Self-defense, clear as day. Anyone here see it different? Margaret Chen appeared along with Dutch, Sura, and a dozen other townspeople. One by one, they shook their heads. They'd all seen Silas's threats. They'd all heard his confession of future crimes. They would all testify that Lena had acted in defense of innocent lives. Besides, Drummond added, looking at Silas's body without much remorse, territorial marshals been wanting an excuse to investigate Thorne's operations for years. This just saved everyone the trouble of a trial. The real question is what happens now. Now? Mara looked at the square where order was slowly being restored. The asylum children were being gathered and comforted. Mrs. Grayson was locked in a cell, still shrieking about injustice. Silas's surviving men were either under arrest or had fled into the mountains. Now we start over. Those children need somewhere to go, Tsura said quietly. The asylum should be shut down, but they can't just be turned out onto the streets. There are proper orphanages, Margaret said, in Denver, in Salt Lake, places where they'll actually be cared for, not exploited. And the government money that was supposed to be going to their care? Dutch raised an eyebrow. Maybe it should actually go to their care this time, set up a proper system, with oversight. That'll require someone to stay and make sure it happens, Drummond pointed out. Someone the children trust. Someone who knows what they've been through. All eyes turned to Lena. She looked startled, then thoughtful. I can't stay here. Can I? She looked at Calder. I just found you. I don't want to... You don't have to stay forever, Calder said. But those children need you right now. They need someone who understands, who can speak for them, who can make sure the people who come next actually care about them. He glanced at Mara, a question in his eyes. Mara understood immediately. We'll stay, for a while, until things are settled, until we know the children are safe and the new system is working. And then? Lena asked. Then you decide, Calder said simply. You're not my property, Nira. You're my daughter, but you're also your own person. You've been making your own decisions for 8 years. I won't take that away from you now. If you want to come with us to the mountains, you're welcome. If you want to stay here and build something new, we'll support that. If you want to go somewhere else entirely and start fresh, we'll help however we can. The choice is yours. Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. I don't know what I want. Everything's changed so fast. Then take your time figuring it out. Mara touched her shoulder gently. We're not going anywhere. Not yet. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The territorial marshal was summoned from the nearest fort. Statements were taken from dozens of witnesses. Mrs. Grayson's records were seized as evidence. The asylum children were temporarily housed with families around town while permanent arrangements were made. Through it all, Lena moved with quiet authority, ensuring the younger children were cared for, that they understood what was happening, that they knew they were safe now. Mara watched her and saw not just Calder's strength, but Anahita's fierce protectiveness. This girl had been forged in trauma, but had somehow emerged with her humanity intact. That night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Mara sat with Calder on the porch of the boarding house where they'd taken rooms. Hope slept peacefully in a crib borrowed from Margaret, and Lena had finally been convinced to rest in the room next door. We did it, Mara said quietly. We actually did it. You did it, Calder corrected. I was ready to just grab her and run. You're the one who insisted on doing it right, on protecting all the children, on exposing the whole rotten system. We did it together. Mara leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders with easy familiarity. You, me, Lena, and a whole town full of people who finally found their courage. What happens now? Calder asked. Really? Once everything's settled here? Mara was quiet for a moment, thinking about the future that had seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. I don't know. Part of me wants to go back to the mountains, to your cabin, to that peace we found there. But part of me thinks maybe we're meant for something else. Like what? Like making sure what happened to those children doesn't happen to others. Like using everything we learned to change the system from the inside. She looked up at him. You spent 8 years searching for one stolen child. What if we spent the next 8 years, or 80, Making sure children can't be stolen in the first place. Calder was silent, considering. Then slowly, he nodded. Anahita would have liked that, using grief as fuel for change instead of just for revenge. Is that what you've been doing, seeking revenge? Maybe at first, but not anymore. He looked toward the room where Lena slept. I got my daughter back. That's not revenge, that's redemption. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over Whitlock. The town that had tried to destroy them was quiet now, licking its wounds and contemplating its future. It would take time to rebuild trust, to establish new systems, to prove that change was possible. But tonight, in this moment, they could simply be. A man who'd found his daughter, a woman who'd saved hers, and a girl who'd discovered that family wasn't just something you were born into, but something you chose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The marshal's investigation, Mrs. Grayson's trial, decisions about the children's futures and their own, questions about where they would go and who they would become. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, they had everything they needed. They had each other. And sometimes that was enough to start rebuilding the world. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days after Silas Thorne's death, riding into Whitlock with a detachment of federal deputies and an expression that suggested he'd seen too much corruption in his career to be surprised by anything. His name was Jacob Morrison, a lean man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. He spent 2 weeks in Whitlock, interviewing witnesses, examining Mrs. Grayson's records, inspecting the asylum with a thoroughness that left no corner unexplored. Mara watched him work and felt the first stirrings of real hope, not the desperate, fragile hope that had sustained them through their escape and fight, but something more solid. The hope that came from watching justice actually function the way it was supposed to. Mrs. Grayson's trial was mercifully brief. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses numerous, and even her expensive lawyers from Denver couldn't spin the documented abuse, fraud, and exploitation into anything resembling innocence. She was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, and when the verdict was read, she showed no remorse. Only bitter rage that she'd been caught. "She'll die in there," Lena said quietly, watching through the courthouse window as Mrs. Grayson was led away in chains. "She's too proud to survive prison." "Does that bother you?" Mara asked gently. They were standing in what had once been Mrs. Grayson's office, now converted into a temporary coordination center for relocating the asylum children. Lena considered the question seriously. "No. Should it? I know I'm supposed to forgive or find peace or whatever the Reverend keeps telling me, but I can't forget what she did to us, how she made us feel worthless, how she punished kindness and rewarded cruelty. If feeling glad she's going to prison makes me a bad person, then I guess I'm a bad person." "It makes you human," Calder said from the doorway. He'd been working with Dutch and the other mountain men to repair the asylum building itself, making it habitable until the children could be permanently relocated. And it's all right to be angry. Anger at injustice is what changes the world. "But it can't be all you feel," Mara added, "or it eats you alive from the inside." Lena looked between them, this unlikely family she'd found herself part of. "How do you do it? How do you move past something like this without letting it destroy you?" Calder moved to stand beside his daughter, and Mara saw how natural it had become, the way they orbited each other. Still learning, still tentative, but undeniably connected. "You find something worth building," he said. "Something that matters more than revenge. For me, it was finding you. For Mara, it was protecting hope. For you, it might be making sure this never happens to anyone else." "Marshal Morrison wants to talk to me," Lena said, "about testifying before the territorial legislature, about changing the laws around how Native children are treated in institutions." She looked nervous, but also excited. "He says my testimony could make a difference." "It will," Mara said with certainty, "because you're not just a victim, Lena. You're a survivor who fought back. That's powerful." "Will you come with me to Denver when I testify?" "Of course," Calder said immediately. "All of us will. You're not facing this alone." Over the following weeks, patterns emerged that would shape their future. The asylum children were carefully evaluated and placed, some with relatives who'd been searching for them, others in properly supervised orphanages, a few with local families who'd come forward offering genuine homes. Marshal Morrison worked with territorial authorities to establish oversight mechanisms, ensuring that institutions caring for children would be regularly inspected and held accountable. And Lena, to everyone's surprise, including her own, became the voice of change. She testified before the territorial legislature in Denver, speaking with a clarity and power that left hardened politicians in tears. She described the systematic erasure of Native children's identities, the abuse disguised as discipline, the exploitation masquerading as education. She presented Mrs. Grayson's meticulously kept records as evidence of a system that valued profit over people. The reforms that followed weren't perfect. Change never was. But they were substantial. New laws required regular inspections of all institutions housing children. Financial audits became mandatory. Native children could no longer be forcibly renamed or forbidden from speaking their original languages. And a fund was established to help families searching for children who'd been taken, providing resources that Calder had never had during his 8 years of desperate searching. "You did this," Marshal Morrison told Lena after the final vote passed. "You should be proud." "It's not enough," Lena said, but there was less despair in her voice than there once had been. "There are still hundreds of children lost in the system, still families torn apart." "Then we keep fighting," Morrison said simply. "This is just the beginning." As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Calder's cabin became a gathering place for the unlikely family they'd formed. Dutch and Sura made the journey regularly, bringing supplies and news from the territory. Margaret Chen came once, making the arduous trip to deliver clothing she'd sewn for Hope, who was growing at an astonishing rate. And Lena, who'd spent 2 months in Denver working with reformers and legislators, finally came home. Home. The word felt strange and right at the same time. The cabin wasn't where Lena had been born, but it was where she was choosing to be. That distinction mattered. Mara was kneading bread dough when she heard the horse approaching. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch to see Lena dismounting with the easy grace she'd learned from Calder's patient teaching. The girl, no, young woman, Mara corrected herself, looked different. Still thin, still carrying shadows in her eyes, but also stronger, more certain of herself. "You're back," Mara said, pulling her into a hug. "I'm back." Lena held on tightly, and Mara felt the tension drain from her. "Is he here?" "Out by the stream with Hope. She's learning to walk and keeps falling in the mud. He's convinced she's going to be a great tracker someday." Lena laughed, and the sound was beautiful. She headed toward the stream, and Mara watched her go, marveling at the transformation. 4 months ago, this girl had been a frightened, abused child who'd learned not to hope. Now she was becoming someone who could change the world. Calder looked up when Lena appeared, and the smile that crossed his scarred face was worth more than all the gold in his saddlebags. Hope, covered head to toe in mud, shrieked with delight at seeing Lena and toddled forward with her arms outstretched. Lena caught her, mud and all, and spun her around. "Look at you, you're so big!" "Da!" Hope announced proudly, pointing at Calder. It was her favorite word lately, applied to both Calder and random objects with equal enthusiasm. "That's right," Lena said, carrying Hope over to where Calder stood. "That's your da, and mine too, apparently." There was still awkwardness in how she said it, still uncertainty. But there was also acceptance, and that was everything. "How was Denver?" Calder asked, falling into step beside her as they walked back toward the cabin. "Exhausting. Frustrating. Important." Lena shifted Hope to her other hip. "The reforms passed, but there's so much resistance. So many people who think we're being too soft on the Indian problem or that we're interfering with states' rights." She sighed. "Marshal Morrison says change takes time, but I want it to happen now. I want every child to be safe today, not in 10 years. "That's because you have your mother's heart," Calder said quietly. "Anahita was the same way, couldn't stand injustice, couldn't walk away from someone in need. It's what made her great. It's also what got her killed." They walked in silence for a moment, and then Lena asked, "Do you think about her, still?" "Every day, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to." Calder's voice was thoughtful. "Finding you, building this—" He gestured at the cabin, at Mara, visible through the window, at the life they'd created. It doesn't replace what I lost, but it proves that you can survive losing everything and still find reasons to keep living. I want to go back, Lena said suddenly, to the place where it happened, where she died. Will you take me? Calder stopped walking. Nearer that place? There's nothing there anymore. The village was burned. The bodies were buried by missionaries who came through months later. It's just empty ground. But it's where she was. Where I was. Where we were a family. Lena's voice was steady. I don't remember it, but I need to see it. I need to know where I came from before I can decide where I'm going. Understanding crossed Calder's weathered face. When do you want to go? Before the first snow, while the pass is still clear. Then we'll go, all of us. He looked toward the cabin. Mara should see it too. She's part of this family now. She should know the whole story. They made the journey 2 weeks later, when the aspens were dropping their golden leaves and the air carried the sharp promise of winter. It took 3 days of hard riding to reach the valley where the massacre had occurred, and with each mile, Mara felt Calder growing quieter, more withdrawn, pulling into himself the way he had when she'd first met him. But Lena rode beside him, steady and present, and Mara realized that the girl was doing for her father what he'd done for her, providing an anchor, a reason to face the pain instead of running from it. The valley was beautiful in a way that made the tragedy that had occurred there even more obscene. A river ran through it, crystal clear and cold. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The ground was covered in wildflowers gone to seed, and elk grazed in the meadows without fear. Nothing remained of the village. The burned lodges had rotted away or been reclaimed by the forest. The missionaries' grave markers had fallen and been covered by vegetation. If you didn't know what had happened here, you'd think it was just another pristine mountain valley, untouched by human hands. Calder dismounted slowly, his movements stiff, and stood looking at a spot near the river where a few fire-blackened stones still marked where a lodge had once stood. This was ours, he said, mine and Anahita's. We built it the autumn after Nero was born. Anahita wanted it close to the water because she said babies should grow up hearing the river's song. His voice cracked. She died right there, protecting the door. They had to step over her body to get to you. Lena slid down from her horse and walked to the spot he'd indicated. She knelt, placing her hand on the earth, and closed her eyes. Mara watched, holding Hope close, and saw tears streaming down the girl's face. I'm sorry I don't remember you, Lena whispered. I'm sorry I can't picture your face or recall your voice, but I promise you I won't forget again. I promise your death meant something. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and river water, and Mara could have sworn she heard something in it, a woman's voice singing the mountain song Calder had taught her. She looked at Calder and saw that he heard it too, his face tilted toward the sky, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. They stayed until sunset, Calder telling stories of Anahita, of their life together, of the Nera that had been before soldiers in asylums and lost years. He showed Lena where she'd taken her first steps, where Anahita had taught her to identify edible plants, where they'd planned to build a bigger lodge for the family they'd hoped to grow. And slowly, painfully, those lost years began to have context. Lena couldn't remember them, but now she knew them. They were real, they were part of her, and they couldn't be taken away again. As night fell, they made camp in the valley and around the fire. Calder taught Lena the proper words to the mountain song. Her pronunciation was rough, 8 years removed from speaking Shoshone, but she persisted until she had it. Then they sang it together, father and daughter, while Mara held hope and felt something sacred happening in this place of grief. This was how healing happened, she realized, not by forgetting, but by remembering and choosing to build something new from the ruins. The journey back to the cabin took 4 days because they traveled slowly, stopping to camp early and talking late into the nights. Lena had questions, hundreds of them, about her mother, her heritage, her first 2 years of life. Calder answered them all with a patience and thoroughness that spoke of how long he'd been waiting for this opportunity. And Mara, listening to their conversations while Hope dozed in her arms, fell deeper in love with this strange, broken, healing man who'd saved her life. It wasn't a fairy tale kind of love. There were no grand declarations or sweeping gestures. It was quieter than that, more solid. It was the way he automatically made sure she had the warmest place by the fire. The way he'd learned to anticipate Hope's needs almost as well as she could. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with a mixture of wonder and gratitude that made her heart ache. On the last night before they reached the cabin, after Lena had fallen asleep and Hope was nestled in her blankets, Calder sat beside Mara and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Mara's heart lurched. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." He turned to face her fully. "When I rode into Whitlock that day, I thought I was just repaying a debt. You'd saved my life once, so I'd save yours. Simple transaction, but somewhere along the way it stopped being about debt and started being about something else." "What?" Mara's voice was barely a whisper. "Family, choice, love." He stumbled over the last word but pushed through. "I loved Anahita. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And so are you. And what I feel for you, it's different from what I felt for her, but it's no less real." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "I loved James too. He was weak and foolish about money, but he was kind to me. And he loved Hope. But he's gone, and we're here, and I feel the same way you do. Different, but real. So where does that leave us?" "I don't know." Mara laughed shakily. "We're not exactly conventional. A widow, a mountain man, a rescued child, and a daughter who's still figuring out whether to call you Calder or father. We're a mess." "We're a family," Calder corrected. "Messy, complicated, not related by blood, except for Nira and me. But that doesn't make it less real." "No," Mara agreed. "It makes it more real. Because we chose each other." Calder leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Mara met him halfway, and their kiss was gentle and unhurried, full of promise and patience. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably wake up and have an awkward conversation about this." Lena's voice came from where she was supposedly sleeping. Mara jumped, mortified, but Calder just laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to come from somewhere he'd thought was dead. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. "Long enough." Lena sat up, grinning. "And for the record, I think it's about time. You two have been dancing around each other for months. It was getting painful to watch." "We were being respectful," Mara protested. "We didn't want to rush anything or make you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable. I'm relieved." Lena came to sit beside them. "You're both too stubborn to be happy alone, and too damaged to trust anyone new. You might as well be damaged together." "That might be the least romantic endorsement I've ever heard," Calder said dryly. "I'm 10 years old." 11, Calder corrected gently. 11, Lena amended. "Romance isn't exactly my forte, but I know what family looks like, even when it's weird and unconventional. And this..." She gestured at the three of them, plus Hope sleeping peacefully nearby. "This is family, so you might as well make it official." "Official?" Mara raised an eyebrow. "You know, get married, adopt each other's kids, whatever it is adults do to make these things legal." Lena shrugged. "Because I don't want to spend the next few years wondering if you're going to split up and leave me choosing sides. I want to know we're in this together, all of us." The raw vulnerability beneath her practical words broke Mara's heart. This child who'd learned not to trust or hope was trusting and hoping anyway, asking for the security of permanence. "We're in this together," Calder said firmly. "Legal or not, married or not, we're family. Nothing changes that." "But I wouldn't mind making it legal," Mara added softly, looking at Calder. "When we're ready, when it feels right." "When it feels right," Calder echoed, and the promise in his voice was as binding as any vow. They reached the cabin the next afternoon to find Dutch and Tsura waiting on the porch with news. Good news for once. "The territorial governor wants to offer you a position," Dutch announced without preamble. "You and Lena both. Official inspectors for institutions housing Native children. You'd have authority to investigate complaints, access to all records, and backing from the federal government." Calder and Lena exchanged glances. "I'm a wanted man in half the territory," Calder pointed out. Bar fights, disturbing the peace, remember? Morrison got all that cleared, Tsura said. Turns out when you expose massive corruption and help implement reform, the government's willing to overlook a few youthful indiscretions. You've got a clean slate. What would it involve? Lena asked. The inspector position. Travel, mostly. Visiting orphanages and schools, interviewing children, making sure the new laws are actually being followed. It wouldn't be easy work. A lot of powerful people have made a lot of money off the current system. They're not going to give up without a fight. Sounds perfect, Lena said immediately, then looked at Calder. If you're willing. You want to do this? Calder asked her. It means we can't hide in the mountains anymore. It means being visible, being targets, dealing with bureaucracy and politicians and all the things we came up here to escape. Yes, Lena said firmly, because hiding in the mountains doesn't change anything. And I'm tired of running from what happened to me. I want to make sure it can't happen to anyone else. Calder looked at Mara, a question in his eyes. What do you think? Mara considered. The cabin was beautiful, the mountains were peaceful, and part of her wanted nothing more than to retreat here with her chosen family and let the world solve its own problems. But she'd been running when Calder found her, desperate and defeated, and he'd given her something more valuable than safety. He'd given her the chance to fight back. I think we do it, she said. We accept the positions. We travel when we need to, but we keep the cabin as home base, somewhere to return to when the world gets too heavy. And I come with you. I'm not sitting safe at home while you two charge into danger. What about Hope? Calder asked. She comes too. She'll learn young that family means standing together, fighting for what's right, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Mara smiled. Besides, she needs to know the full story someday. She should be able to say she was there when things changed. Dutch grinned. Should I tell the governor you accept? Tell him we accept, Calder said, with conditions. We work as a unit, all three of us, plus Mara and Hope. We have final say over which cases we investigate, and we report directly to Morrison, not some politician who might be compromised. He'll agree, Dutch said confidently. You're heroes, whether you like it or not. The territory needs heroes right now. After Dutch and Tsura left, promising to return in a month with official paperwork and assignments, the four of them sat on the cabin porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Hope dozed in Mara's lap, exhausted from the long journey. Lena leaned against Calder's shoulder, comfortable in a way that had seemed impossible just months ago. And Calder's arm was around Mara, solid and warm and real. Are we sure about this? Lena asked quietly. Once we start, there's no going back. We'll have enemies, people who want to preserve the system that benefits them. It could be dangerous. It's already dangerous, Mara pointed out. We've been nearly killed 6 times in the last few months. At least this way, we're doing something that matters. Your mother would be proud, Calder told Lena. Anahita believed in fighting for what was right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. You have her courage. I have her stubbornness, you mean, Lena said, but she was smiling. And yours too, apparently. We're all too stubborn to know when to quit. Good, Mara said. The world needs stubborn people. Compliant people don't change anything. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, and another answered. The river sang its endless song, and in the cabin behind them, a fire burned warm and bright. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow and making travel impossible for months. But they didn't mind. They spent the long winter preparing for the work ahead, Calder teaching Lena to track and survive in wilderness, Mara organizing their documentation and building a system for tracking cases, all of them learning to be the family they'd accidentally become. Hope took her first real steps in the snow, shrieking with delight as she fell face first into a drift. Lena taught her the mountain song in Shoshone, mangling the pronunciation but getting better each day. Calder carved toys for her, a horse, a bear, a bird that looked suspiciously like the one Mara wore around her neck. And on a clear February morning, with Dutch and Tsura as witnesses, Calder and Mara were married by a traveling preacher who'd somehow made it through the snow to perform weddings for isolated mountain families. It was a simple ceremony, no fancy clothes or elaborate preparations. But when Calder slipped a ring onto Mara's finger, carved from wood, and inlaid with a pattern of stars. She knew it was more binding than any gold band could ever be. "Family," he said simply. "Family," she echoed, and Lena, holding Hope and watching with eyes that still held shadows but also held light, smiled and added her own quiet affirmation. "Family." Spring came with the rush of snowmelt and the return of green to the mountains. With it came Marshal Morrison, riding up to the cabin with their official credentials and their first assignment. An orphanage in Wyoming had been accused of abuse. Children had disappeared from its rolls without explanation. The local authorities claimed everything was fine, but 3 Native families had written to the territorial government begging for help finding their children. "Sound familiar?" Morrison asked grimly. "Too familiar," Calder agreed. "When do we leave?" "Whenever you're ready." They were ready. The work was exactly as hard as they'd anticipated. They encountered resistance at every turn. Administrators who lied, politicians who obstructed, bureaucrats who insisted proper channels had to be followed even when children were suffering. They found institutions that made Mrs. Grayson's asylum look merciful by comparison, and others that were genuinely trying to help but were overwhelmed and underfunded. But they also found children, dozens of them, who'd been reported dead or lost but were actually alive. They reunited families that had been torn apart. They exposed abuse and saw abusers prosecuted. And slowly, painfully, they helped build a system that was slightly less cruel than the one they'd started with. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The years passed. Hope grew into a bright, fearless child who could track deer through the forest and recite territorial law with equal facility. Lena became one of the most feared inspectors in the Western Territories, combining her father's intimidating presence with her mother's fierce compassion. She never fully recovered her lost memories, but she built new ones, better ones, with the family she'd chosen. And Calder and Mara, 2 broken people who'd found each other at the worst possible moment, built a life that proved redemption was possible. Not easy, not perfect, but possible. On Nira's 21st birthday, they returned to the valley where the massacre had occurred. It had been 10 years since their last visit, and the place had continued its transformation from battleground back to wilderness. But they'd brought something with them this time, a marker carved from stone, bearing the names of everyone who'd died there, including Anahita's. "I'm getting married," Nira announced as they finished setting the stone. "To a Shoshone teacher I met in Denver. His name is Thomas. He's kind and smart, and he makes me laugh. I think Mother would have approved." "She would have," Calder said with certainty. "When's the wedding?" "Next summer. And I want it here, in this valley. I want her to be present, even if it's just in spirit." "We'll make it happen," Mara promised. They stood together by the marker as the sun set, 4 people bound by choice and love rather than blood. Hope, now 9 years old, placed wildflowers on the stone. Nira sang the mountain song, her pronunciation perfect, now after years of practice. Calder and Mara stood with their arms around each other, grateful for the impossible second chances they'd been given. That night, making camp in the valley, Mara pulled out a worn photograph. It showed the 4 of them, Calder, Mara, Nira, and Hope, standing in front of the cabin with the mountains rising behind them. They looked wind-blown and travel-worn, but they were smiling, really smiling. Beneath the photograph, in Calder's careful script, was a single word, family. "You know what the best part is?" Nira said, looking at the photograph over Mara's shoulder. "What?" "We chose this. Every single one of us could have walked away at any point, but we chose each other. We chose to fight together, to heal together, to build something together. That's more powerful than any blood relation could ever be." "Your mother used to say something similar," Calder said quietly. "She said her tribe wasn't just the people she was born to, but the people she chose to stand with. I didn't really understand what she meant until now." "She'd be proud of us," Nira said. "All of us. For taking something terrible and making something beautiful out of it." "She'd be proud of you especially," Calder corrected. "You could have let what happened to you make you cruel or bitter. Instead, you became someone who fights to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That takes a strength most people never find." Nira leaned against her father's shoulder, comfortable in the affection that had taken years to build, but was now as solid as the mountains surrounding them. I had good teachers. They sat in the firelight, passing around dried meat and bannock, sharing stories about the children they'd helped reunite with families, the reforms they'd pushed through, the small victories that added up to meaningful change. It wasn't the ending anyone would have predicted 8 years ago, when a desperate widow stood on courthouse steps watching her baby be sold, and a mountain man rode into town carrying 8 years of grief. But it was their ending. Hard-won, imperfect, and absolutely real. And in the morning, they would pack up camp and return to the work that was never finished, fighting for justice, protecting the vulnerable, and proving that family wasn't something you were born into, but something you built, one choice at a time. The photograph remained pinned above the cabin's fireplace for the next 40 years, a testament to the day a widow, a mountain man, and a stolen child found each other and chose to become something more than the sum of their tragedies. Beneath it, in letters carved deep into the wood, was their truth. Family. Because in the end, blood didn't make them one. Choosing each other did. And that choice, made in desperation and despair, but sustained through love and commitment, changed not just their lives, but the lives of hundreds of children who came after them. It proved that even when the world tried to tear families apart, love, chosen, fierce, unbreakable love, could stitch them back together. That was the real story, not the dramatic rescue or the courtroom confrontation or even the romantic sunset ending. It was the quiet morning after morning of choosing each other, of showing up, of doing the work, of being family.